Welcome, trailblazers and visitors, to Utah Tech University. In order to have a great time, we have a plan in place for you to have an amazing and safe experience. All are invited to download the Utah Tech Safe app to keep updated with important information during your stay at Utah Tech. Once seated, please look at your surroundings and identify your closest points of exit. In the event of an emergency and evacuation is required, please head to your nearest unobstructed exit in a calm and orderly manner. We have identified some situations where an evacuation may be necessary for your safety. In the event of a fire or other emergency, please evacuate the Cox Performing Arts Center. Please proceed up the stairs and out the main exits. Do not use the elevators. If you are on stage or backstage, please exit out the west doors. Below the stage, use the stairs up into the hallway. Please use the closest exit to your location. If you are on the concourse, please leave the building at the nearest exit. All sections may be asked to proceed to the area west of the Cox Performing Arts Center and to wait for further instructions and to meet your party. If you have a physical disability and need assistance evacuating, please ask your closest usher or UT official for help exiting the Cox Performing Arts Center. Follow ushers and UT officials to the designated safe locations. Please do not re-enter the building until university safety officials or their designees have given the all clear. Our main concern is the well-being of you, our guests. Look for ushers and UT officials for further guidance or if you have any questions. Please make sure to listen for announcements through our overhead system or through our Utah Tech Safe app to receive further information and instructions while evacuating or sheltering in place. Once again, thank you, trailblazers and visitors, for attending an event on our campus and for helping us keep you and others safe while visiting Utah Tech University. Enjoy the performance.
Testing. I think we can go ahead and lower the house lights. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. If you would please kindly find your seats, we're going to get started here momentarily. Thank you. Appreciate that. My name is Vince Brown, and I am the director of the Institute of Politics and Public Affairs here at Utah Tech University. I also teach political science. I'd like to welcome you to our two-part event tonight. So thanks for coming to the first part. And before we begin, I'd like to say thanks to a few people. It takes a lot to put on these types of events. First of all, Utah Tech University for hosting us. We're always thrilled when they allow us to use their facilities. And along with that, the production staff who work so hard to get these events done. I'd like to thank them for their flexibility and professionalism. And then finally, my team of students who are at the Institute of Politics. The Institute is run by myself and a bunch of hardworking, dedicated students. So I'm always appreciative for their hard work, and you'll see them around here in their blue polos. Our first event tonight is to introduce the candidates for the GOP primary who are running to replace retiring Senator Mitt Romney. Rob Axon, the chair of the Utah GOP, is going to be handling the moderation for this first event, and I'll be back at 6:15 to start the next one, which is our congressional debate and forum. So would you put your hands together and welcome Rob Axon?
Thank you very much. Appreciate all of you guys for being here. As Vince said, my name is Robert Axon. I'm the chairman of the Utah Republican Party. And as a Republican, the thing that makes me most proud of that statement of being a Republican, frankly, has nothing to do with the party name, even the cool logo. I would take an elephant over a donkey any day of the week. But the thing that actually motivates me is the principles that we believe in. It's those principles of limited government, those principles that our founding was based off of, and those principles that, in my opinion, are best positioned to help families thrive, help communities thrive, and protect and preserve the future that I want my children to grow up in. And so with that, I'm grateful for all of you as citizens who engage in the process. This is how our system of government works. This is why people have fought through hundreds of years of history in our country for the liberties to engage in civil discourse, debate those ideas, and have a system of government that works for us, where we are the sovereign. All of that matters, and a big part of that, it depends on good people being willing to stand up. So before I introduce the four candidates who will be with us today, I need to point out a couple of things. First, I need to thank Vince. So Vince is fantastic. He said a lot of thank yous to everybody else, but we appreciate Vince Brown and the Institute and the school here in providing us this opportunity for the very first forum of what we are going to be doing. And moving forward, just so all of you know, since this is an open Senate seat, I want, and the Republican Party wants, all of you as Utahns and as constituents to get to know these candidates, to vet them, to understand what they're putting forward, what ideas they have, how they would represent all of us in the United States Senate. Because I trust all of you to make a good decision when provided that opportunity to vet the candidates. And I trust these candidates to respect all of you enough to show up and to be engaged throughout the process. So this will be the first of what will in all likelihood be a number, maybe 3, 4, I don't know exactly. We'll work with all of these campaigns, events over the course of the next 6+ months as we lead up to our convention. And so a couple of important dates. March 5th is caucus night. April 27th is convention. You show up at caucus, you run to be a delegate, then you're at convention and you get to vote for all of these candidates or your preferred candidates. So remember that. But even if you're not a delegate, caucus matters. So please, all of you, and by applause, let's see, who's planning on going to caucus night on March 5th? Just like we did in 2016, we will be having our presidential preference poll within the party caucus. And so that is also the opportunity for you to come and decide who should represent us in ensuring that Joe Biden is a one-term president. So March 5th, make sure you're there. So this forum tonight is going to be more of an introduction for all of these candidates. And as we go through, I just mentioned we're going to have maybe 4 of these, 5 of these that the state party will put on. By the end of it, it's going to be a debate. Today, it's a nice, friendly forum. And so we're going to slowly be going down that trajectory as we go along. But I have put together a number of questions from some of you, from others around our state, not just in Washington County. I'm going to invite Lisa Sandberg, our county party chair, to come up and ask a couple of questions. So looking forward to having each of them engage in this. And so real quick, I'm going to invite all of these candidates to come. And tonight we've decided to do it by alphabetical order because this isn't a debate yet. We're still on that very friendly, just introductory stage. So we're going to rely upon the God-given name that they have. And so in alphabetical order, I guess that would be Ron Bird Jr. And so just sit in the first comfy chair to the left of my less comfy chair. And then after that, I think it would be Carolyn Phippen. Now we're testing my alphabetical skills. So Carolyn Phippen, come on up. And then Josh Randall will be next, and then Trent Staggs. So that will be the order that we're going to start things. We will be starting with 2 minutes for opening statement and kind of introducing themselves. We'll then dive into the questions, and I will provide each of the amounts of time for each of those questions so that you know. McKay, where are you? Or we've got a timer. So hold up the times for all of these candidates to see. And one other thing, since we're on the nice, friendly introduction forum side of the equation and not the debate, I'm not going to cut you off. I'll give you a chance to finish off your statement. And so as the time comes down, don't abuse this opportunity, but, wrap up 1 or 2 sentences to finish your thought. Once we get to the debate time of this schedule, we're going to start cutting you off. You have to be ready to answer the question. Yeah, run-on sentences, it's a grammatical issue that Vince Brown is going to give you a bad score for, but no, you would be allowed to finish the thought. So with that, we're going to jump right in. Final piece of information that I will provide, the school is live streaming this, and so we will provide this as a record after the fact as well. So in addition to people who get to watch this live, each of the candidates can push this out. The state Republican Party will push this out so delegates and constituents and voters around the state can start to get to know all of these candidates. The final thing I would ask all of you to do is once we are done with the first portion of this, stick around to support our Republican nominee, Celeste Malloy, but she will be engaged in a debate with Kathleen Reby, the Democrat nominee for this 2nd Congressional special election. And so we look forward to all of you getting to see those 2 candidates. And with that, we're going to jump right into things. And again, we'll start right here with Ron Bird Jr. And Rod Bird, I apologize. With Rod, see, I call him JR. I've known him as JR for a long time, and then the new name, the first name takes a minute. So Rod, you're going to be starting things off 2 minutes.
So Rod Bird Jr., like you said, I've been called JR because as the junior illustrates, that's my dad's name. And so there was a lot of confusion growing up, but Rod or JR is just fine. I was born and raised in the Uinta Basin, and it's a wonderful place in Utah to live and grow up. The most important thing about me is I'm a husband. My beautiful wife's in the audience, and I'm a father of 4 children. And, growing up, I was taught the value of hard work, to speak the truth, to do what is right, to lend a hand to those in need. And those are the core values that I grew up with. In the Uinta Basin, we're an oil and gas town, and I think many of you may be aware of that. In the early 80s, there was a bust, and we didn't have much growing up. We lost our home to fire, and we were a little bit transient for a while. My dad, we actually lived in a 10-by-20 shed while my dad rebuilt our home with his own hands. That taught me a lot. First and foremost, it taught me that hard work and dedication will get you somewhere in America, and that is the American dream. Currently, I'm a business owner. I'm the mayor of my hometown, and I own approximately 160 acres of farm ground where I grow alfalfa and raise a few cattle. And the reason I'm running for Senate is because the American dream that I've experienced is under attack. And if you look at the policies and the decisions that are being implemented in Washington by not only the Biden administration, but career politicians on both sides of the aisle, you'll see that the opportunities and that the freedoms that we enjoy are being robbed from us and our children. I'm here to, I was going to say fight, but I don't like that word fight. I'm here to stand up and stand against government overreach, to demand transparency, to support the rule of law, to cut wasteful spending and balance the budget, to secure the border and work for immigration reform. And I will always put America first, and I will push for energy independence. And there are some things I will fight for. I will fight for, to protect our families and our God-given constitutional rights. And as you can see, I'm just a regular guy. I wear boots and jeans to work most every day. But I'm not afraid to roll up my sleeves, get my hands dirty, and do what it takes to get the job done. And so we have a lot of work in Washington. With your support, we can come up with solutions. Thank you.
Carolyn.
All right, is this working? Carolyn Phippen. So I was born and raised actually in New York, in the same area where my third great-grandfather was born, who came to Utah and settled the town I currently live in, Draper, Utah. I was back there with my family and learned really early on, especially being a Mormon in New York, that sometimes you have to stand up for things that are hard and you have to be a little different from everybody else. I have no problem doing that and understand that the only way we will solve the problems that we have in Washington that are really impacting every one of us and overtaking our nation in so many ways are if we stop sending the same kind of people back to Washington. People who are politicians looking for one more rung on the ladder and one more advancement for their job. So I was home for 20 years raising my children. I came to Utah 35 years ago to attend BYU and have been here ever since, except for a short period of time where I served a mission for my church in Czechoslovakia. I was there, came back, had 5 children. My husband Scott is here. We've been married almost 31 years next month, and we have 5 boys. I spent time, as I said, raising them and working in a number of different ways, politically and especially in the nonprofit world. All privately funded nonprofits, by the way, work to better the lives of children and at-risk youth. And over that time, I also started writing for politicians around the country and had graduated with a degree in political science and have worked in policy for 15 years now. I worked for Mike Lee. I worked for the House Majority prior to that, and one of the biggest things that I worked on there at the House was fighting back Obamacare Medicaid expansion. I crafted the arguments that got the Senate to vote against it. They were ready to pass it and support the governor in that and to convince the House members that they shouldn't do that. My biggest, most recent priority was working against ESG, and I led a working group with business people as well as the AG, Marlo Oaks, and a number of elected representatives to figure out what some solutions to the ESG problems were that we had, and 4 bills were passed this last legislative session. I know how to do the difficult things. I know how to stand up when it's tough. Carolyn Phippen, thank you.
My name is Josh Randall. This is what happens when you watch the Timberwolves beat the Jazz by 25 points. I'm just kidding. Kind of lost my voice the last couple of days, but as I've thought about what we need in a new senator, I think there's a statement that really embodies it for me. Whoever we send to the Senate is going to vote who they are. Whoever we send to the Senate is going to represent who they're going to be who they are. I am a father, a husband. Been married for 10 years. I'm a father of 6 kids under the age of 10, and I'm a CPA, and I work as the audit manager for the Trust Lands Administration here in the state of Utah. I'm running largely for because of what I just went over there. I saw a great need in Washington. I've seen a great need in Washington. We've all seen it. We've got a spending problem. I'm confident that I can help with that. We have problems with a lot of moral issues, family values. I have a very vested interest in that. I want my kids to be in the best schools. I want your kids to be in the best schools. I want Utah's schools to be free of what's going on in Virginia. And they are so far, but it's kind of heading our way. And I'm convinced that we need senators who know how to work with people, but who won't compromise. And I'm running because I feel confident that I can persuade people to come to vote where they need to vote, as opposed to just compromising in order to reach across the aisle. And I think that's one of the most important elements right now that we need in the Senate, is somebody who's going to be able to stand firm and compromise when they can, like whether you're going to go to Zupa's or Texas Roadhouse type compromise, as opposed to compromising on whether or not on family values that are drugs, alcohol, immigration, fentanyl. We've got major problems. And so I would ask you to look at my website. This isn't the greatest speech. I kind of came straight from work today, to be honest with you. Got in the car and drove down to St. George. It's been a busy day. But I'm confident that I can help us with the budget, and I'm confident that I can help us with our family values. And one of my main tenets is to also encourage you to live your values, to live your religion, and to vote your values. It makes me sad every time I hear people who are afraid to vote their values. And as a senator, I will encourage that, and I will always vote our Utah values. Thank you.
Test. Are we on? Okay. Well, Dixie, it's good to be with you here tonight. I'm Trent Staggs, and I have been a lifelong Utahn. Grew up in Orem, then moved up to South Jordan, attended Bingham High, graduated from the University of Utah in political science and economics, and then attended BYU, got my master's in business from there. I've operated several businesses in the state. I even took a company public. We got listed on NASDAQ last year in the energy space. So energy independence, energy dominance is very, very important to me. I think what this election is all about is replacing Mitt Romney with someone who has the resolve, the proven, the demonstrated resolve to push back against the establishment, not become a part of it. We need to have somebody who is there that is willing to fight. That's what I've done. I have fought for 10 years now that I've been in elected office in Riverton, 4 years on the council and 6 years as mayor. I fought back against high-density housing. I fought against mask mandates. I was one of the few mayors that said, not in my town. We fought against vaccine mandates. We fought against ESG and passed resolutions against that insidious practice. I fought against inappropriate materials in school with our school district. I authored a resolution. We passed a resolution in support of human life back in 2019 on our city council, and proud of it. And I think the way in which I've handled my campaign, we've been at it now for 5 months. I was willing to take on the establishment and take on Mitt Romney. I was willing to go ahead and run and take on the establishment. And because of that, we have been on national media, and I've garnered the endorsements of several national conservatives. Mark Levin, Charlie Kirk, Kerry Lake, Harmeet Dillon, Rick Grinnell, Kash Patel. These have all endorsed our candidacy. Just yesterday, we got Veterans for Trump on the drive down here to southern Utah, and the state FOP, the Fraternal Order of Police, has endorsed my campaign. We've also received the endorsement of about 100 local elected officials. And I think what they like is that I have that experience, that demonstrated experience in elected office, and demonstrated the resolve to push back against the establishment. And I will do that every single day as your U.S. Senator. Thank you.
Thank you, candidates. Thank you, candidate. Can you guys hear me? They can hear me. They can hear me? Can you guys, there we go. So candidates, thank you very much. One thing that I neglected to point out, and I meant to do that before, is to allow you all to know our process moving forward, because I could see a situation where some additional candidates come out of the woodwork, including some folks that I've heard may be thinking about it, but as the party, we will invite everybody who is a declared candidate. So the 5 people who were declared candidates when we put on this process are the 4 included here, and then Brad Wilson, who had an engagement that he could not get out of to be down here this go around, but he was invited. I want you all to know that. And should any other candidates put themselves in the ring officially, they too would be invited. So I just wanted to make sure to point that out. And since I'm pointing out a couple of things, there is a nice little QR code over there. You're welcome to take a photo, go to the party's website, make a donation. We'll take the money and we'll put it to use to get Republicans across the finish line. But with that, we're going to jump right into the questions. And we're going to start off with some questions to help all of these folks get to know each of you a little bit better. And these questions, or at least this next one, is a 1-minute question. Please, and real quick, since you started, Carolyn, you're going to start this question and we'll just rotate on through. So with that, please share some examples of what you feel makes Utah a special place and how, if you are elected, you are best able to represent those strengths on behalf of Utahns while in D.C.
Yeah, I think one of the things that makes Utah a very special place, frankly, is the people and our values. As somebody who has lived in other countries and grew up in a completely different area of this nation, and frankly, most of my siblings live all over the country. They were all here this past weekend, and I enjoyed it very much. But we do have a culture that is unique, and the very things that make us unique are the very things that Washington is undermining consistently with policies that interfere in the ability of families to do what they need to do, families and communities, frankly. I could go on and on about this and give you some examples, but I only have a few seconds left. So I would say that really is number one, government policy interfering in individual choice actually ends up tearing down cultures that are productive and prosperous.
Josh, same question to you.
Same question?
Same question.
Okay. I also have a QR code on a poster out there on Josh Randall, likejoshRandall.com. We don't gamble in Utah. We have tight liquor laws in Utah. We have a lot of charitable giving in Utah, the most in the nation. That's in monetary, but we also give a lot of our time. We have a very large middle class in Utah. We have very strong emphasis on marriage in Utah. We have a very nuanced and very good position on abortion in Utah. We're not into marijuana. I know a lot of those things. I start to look at those collectively, and I believe that those actually are having an effect monetarily, not just on the people and their happiness, but I think it is the reason largely that we very, very seldom run a deficit in Utah. I love those things about Utah. I'm convinced that they are huge, and I wish that we could convince more states in the United States to do the same things. So that's just a few things, I guess.
Perfect. Thank you, Josh.
I think our families are what make Utah so unique. And, you know, the family is the most fundamental unit of society. It really is. The stronger a family is, the less government has to do, or they feel like on the left they have to do. And that's why they've been so persistent at this and trying to destroy the family. And if you look at my website at trentstaggs.com, I have 3 overarching themes. I say, as your senator, I'll champion smaller government, safer families, and a stronger economy. And the 3 policy prescriptions that I have for safer families is, number 1, the Second Amendment, inalienable right to protect ourselves and our family. I say, number 2, get rid of the Department of Education. They have $184 billion in this fiscal year budget. It's absurd. I have state school board candidates that have endorsed my candidacy. They control our education system, yet only account for about 6% of all state education dollars. And third, separation between woke and state. We need to go ahead and not fund these types of the wokeism that is infiltrated and sadly is too wholeheartedly endorsed by the Biden administration. It's made a way into our military, education system, across many things, and those are the things we need to fight for in D.C.
So, as the rest of the candidates were speaking, some of the things that came to my mind were, first and foremost, our belief in God. We're a God-fearing people here in Utah, and we need to protect that, and I think that goes a long way. That's something that is needed across our nation. Second thing I can think of, along with family, is again, good, strong family units. But one of the things that we really understand in the Uinta Basin is how to take care of each other and not have to rely on the government to take care of ourselves. I'll give you an illustration. We have an addiction recovery program in the Uinta Basin, totally funded by the community, the public, something that I've been heavily involved with financially. And I want to tell you some statistics on this. So the addiction recovery there has a 46% success rate. Do you know what the national average is? And it's faith-based. The national average is about 6 to 8%. One of the things that I love about Utah is we know how to take care of our own. We have faith in God, and we are firm in our families. Thank you.
So this next question, Josh, we'll be starting off with you. What has been one of your greatest challenges in life, and what lessons from that experience prepare you to be a United States Senator?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is finding my wife, actually. How does that help me become a senator? That's an interesting question. This will sound like a funny story. When I was 21, I made a commitment to go on a date every week. And I did that for about 10 years. I think I went on dates with about 350 young ladies and probably 550 dates. But I'll tell you how I think it could help as a senator. I had in mind what I was looking for in a wife. I knew I wanted somebody who was wholesome, virtuous, and had specific values. And I just couldn't quite find somebody where it clicked, though I tried many. But I had a hope, and I had a faith, and I believe we need miracles. I think it was something of a miracle to find my wife. And if you meet her tonight, you'll think, wow, she was worth the wait. She was. And it was a miracle. And I think we need miracles and people who will maintain faith and hope and wait for the miracles. They can come, and we can persuade people, just like I had to persuade my wife, and even though it was a miracle. But I think that's needed in Congress, someone with faith and hope who can persuade and wait for the miracles.
I've had a number of challenges in my life, but I think the financial stress growing up, I had a family with 10 children. I have 7 sisters and 2 brothers. And my dad started out as a high school teacher and a football coach. We didn't make much money. We didn't do, I didn't know any different, right? And so we learned to pinch pennies. We learned how to budget. As a mayor, as someone running my community for the last 10 years, I've had to balance my budget. Washington, D.C., now $33.5 trillion in debt, placing that level of burden on my kids and successive generations, I have said, is the height of immorality. That is so immoral. And we cannot deal with that. We've got to get back there and take the skills that I've acquired in terms of balancing the budget to D.C. And we can do it. No more omnibus spending. I just put out a contract with Utah. I will not vote for that. We've got to get back to regular order. 12 appropriation subcommittees, all producing budgets, ample opportunity for debate and amendment. That will get us back to a sense of fiscal sanity. And that's what I hope to be able to do in my very first year.
Same question?
Same question.
Okay. So some of the experience that I've had, like Trent, we didn't have much growing up. I learned how to be fiscally responsible. I'm a business owner. I've been a business owner for 16 years. I've also, working for other companies, my very first job came into a business that was losing money. And if you look at the budget, we're losing money on a national level. $33.7 trillion in debt right now. I was able to turn that business around. I came in after 3 months and had it in the red. It was of the stores across the nation, it was the #1 most profitable store. Then I started my business. I've purchased other businesses that were failing, turned them around. I have a knack for that. I understand financials. The other thing that I have experience in, I've worked in the oil and gas industry for 22 years. Energy is a huge thing right now, energy independence, and like has been mentioned, leadership in energy. We need to be on the forefront of that. Our border needs to be secured. There's no doubt about it. With the people that are pouring in, the drugs and the human trafficking pouring in, we need to do that, but we need immigration reform. I've worked in the Spanish community for the last 7 years. I know exactly what the problems are. I know how to fix those problems, but I'm not going to sit up here and say that I have all the answers. I know how to collaborate, how to get people to join our team, how to reach out to others that have expertise, bring them in, and it will take a team effort, but we can do this.
So I would say that government overreach in every aspect of our lives. It's impacted me like it's impacted a lot of people. We've seen the way that the government has manipulated the economy, frankly, to serve those who are friends of those in power. Many of us experience difficulties when there are downturns in the economy. I've experienced those myself. I did just last year actually build a greenhouse and buy chickens. My husband has inherited the chickens, and not much is growing in the greenhouse right now because I decided to get a little busy. But I will say that we need to know and understand that government's role is to protect our inalienable rights, to preserve our inalienable rights. And the federal government is supposed to be very limited in their rights and responsibilities, and we have so surpassed that. There are a lot of good solutions. When I worked for Mike Lee, I worked talking about over and over and over again the REINS Act that is currently in the Senate. It recently passed the House, that would pull back the agency's ability to regulate and have massive impact on our economy. We've all seen the weaponization of government in a way that would never be possible without all of the money that our federal government is printing and spending every year. So that's one place to start.
Moving to the next question, and of course, Trent, we're going to be starting with you. On this, it's also going to be 1-minute questions. And this first question, we will have just 2 of you answer, and then the next 2 of you will have a different question. So this first question is, in your own words, please explain federalism, and if you feel the principle is alive and well in the United States of America, with examples if appropriate.
In one word, explain federalism?
In 1 minute.
In 1 minute. All right. Well, federalism is what our system is built on. It's the proper role of government. And it is envisioned that you have a dual federalism system. It is the federal government and then the collection of states. And that there are few and defined functions that the federal government should actually be engaged in. They're largely detailed in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. And unfortunately, what has happened, and the rest should be reserved, it says in the 10th Amendment, to the states or to the people, respectively. And sadly, what has happened is the federal government has grown so large and exceeded the scope that our founders ever envisioned. That's why we're $33.5 trillion in debt. That's why we have a regulatory state run amok. That's why so many businesses have told me I'm too small to succeed. I can't afford the army of accountants and attorneys that I need to be able to compete with the cabal of big business and government. We need to get back and return to federalism. And I understand that. As a mayor, that's why I've received the endorsements of so many people here locally, because I understand the proper role of government. As a mayor, I say I have been on the front lines of fighting governmental overreach at the federal, state, and even county level. I've been doing it for 10 years, and I'll take that perspective back to D.C. and ensure that we return to federalism.
I don't have a ton to add with what Trent said, other than, the way our republic was set up in federalism was to protect the minority against a majority, and that's why we're not a democratic state or a nation of democracy. We're a nation of republic, and that is to protect for example, the states, when they formed the Constitution, the fear was that the larger states would overrule the smaller states. That's why we have a Senate, not just a House. So these federalist ideas is what protects the minority against the majority rule, and it protects our inalienable rights that have been mentioned here tonight. But along with that, I agree wholeheartedly that the federal government has completely run amok with and overstepped their bounds with a lot of the things that they've implemented. It's almost daunting to think of how difficult it's going to be to roll that back. But I know that we can. It's not going to be just one senator going back to Washington or going to Washington and fixing the problem, but it's going to be a senator and people standing up and motivating others to get involved and change our country, change what's happening. That's how we do it. Thank you.
So Carolyn and Josh, this question is to the two of you. Carolyn first. This is a different but related question. In your own words, please explain separation of powers and how you plan on executing your duties as a United States Senator to strengthen this foundational principle.
Yeah, well, I am going to start with what I just ended on last time, REINS Act. I mean, frankly, and I'll move on from that in just a moment, but the fact of the matter is, we have a legislative branch that has given up its power so that it doesn't have to take difficult votes and stand up for things. So they've allowed the agencies, they've allowed the executive branch to essentially be lawmaking bodies, unelected bureaucrats that are making rules that can send us to prison, that can ruin businesses and ruin things in our lives, and they have the power of law. There's no way that should be happening. So the powers are separated among the branches of government, but to the federalism issue, they're also separated between the federal and state government. And we have so much overreach when it comes to the federal government, and frankly in Utah, where we have something like 67% of our lands, I know it recently shifted because of the monument change, something like 67% of our lands in federal hands. As I worked on issues for Mike Lee repeatedly, we were dealing with the problems that members of our state and in our communities were having as a result of the federal government interfering in every aspect of their lives just because of the power that they had on those lands. It's untenable for a state, and it disadvantages us compared to other states.
Well, I think the executive branch has gotten large. It's gotten large on the federal level. It's getting larger on the state levels as well. As far as the separation of powers, as senators and as congressmen, we hold the purse. And there's a lot of missteps, a lot of lawmaking, kind of how Carolyn said, that kind of takes place amongst the different agencies where they are borderline inappropriate and they're crossing lines. And as a senator, one of my convictions is to say, I hold the purse. We hold the purse. We've got to rein it in. And I think that's one of the main roles that I see as a senator, is to say, if we see a problem, we may need to go and defund it. Defund some type of actions that some agencies are taking. Department of Education has got a variety of those, as Trent has said, and he's right on. We probably can go ahead and defund the Department of Education as needed to put a stop to things like that. So,
thank you. This next question will be to all four of you. It's a 1-minute question, and Rod, you'll be starting on this one. Please provide an example of where you feel the constitutional rights of American citizens are threatened and what you will do to counter that from the United States Senate.
Let's see, that's a good question. So, where are they not threatened? So, if you look at really what the Constitution was designed to do, the Constitution was designed to protect us, individualism, the right of property, life, and freedom. And if you look at the way government's set up right now, our freedoms are being threatened on every side. I mean, you look at the 16th Amendment, taxing of income tax, and then you look at the appropriations, and you look at how that's redistributed. That is an infringement on our personal rights. You look at Man, I don't know even where to go with this, because it's so large. But you know, we're always battling our Second Amendment rights, and we're battling even our First Amendment rights, which is really sad right now: freedom of speech and being silenced and being what did you say? Amen. Yeah, being silenced. There was another word that I was thinking of, but all of our rights are being contested right now, and it's really sad to see. We got to get back to the Constitution and really understand what the fundamental principles of the Constitution are and adhere to those.
So I think we've forgotten that the Constitution is a document not only that establishes government, but also protects us from the power of government, from the unfair power of government. And to Rod's point, the First Amendment, when it comes to freedom of speech, we have learned so much in the last year. And in fact, I just read something. I hate to say I get like half my news off of Twitter these days, but I do. And I just read something on Twitter yesterday. I think Jim Jordan had put it out about some new documents that had been received with regard to the weaponization of government, and all of the individual accounts that had been targeted at the behest of our federal government. That is such a blatant and absolute violation of our very most fundamental rights, that the Constitution is meant to provide protection for us with regard to the federal government. They're actually stripping us of those, and very little is happening. And we need more people who are willing to not only, I'm grateful that Congress is uncovering these things, but we have to have people who are willing to take the next step. And let me just say, as a mother, again, who's raised 5 boys, I want the life and the country that I leave for them to be the kind of country that I enjoyed and the kind of life that I enjoyed. And we are not on track for that right now.
Could you repeat the question for me, Rob?
Yep, and I'll make sure to read it so you get the exact same thing that I said. Please provide an example where you feel the constitutional rights of American citizens are threatened, and what you will do to counter that from the United States Senate.
Well, I think it's been interesting to watch emergency declarations in the last couple of years among states and in the federal government as well. I think that there's a place for the Senate and the House to step in and apply a few more guidelines for emergency declarations. I don't have time to really get into a ton of that right now, but the idea of whether or not you can override your legislatures when it comes to voting policies, whether an executive branch determines that churches are non-essential and liquor stores are essential, or emergencies, let the executive branch kind of go nuts. And I think that the Congress can help that problem. Additionally, I mean, I posted something on Facebook a couple years ago, kind of during COVID, and I think it was actually to a church website of my church, and it got labeled as false information or as inappropriate or misinformation. I thought, well, that's really something. That's misinformation. I think it's a problem, and it's already kind of been addressed, but there needs to be a few more safeguards in this ministry of truth that almost got formed in our country a couple years ago. And I think the lady resigned, and it kind of got dissolved. But that's crazy that we've got executive agencies who are coming to the conclusion that, hey, we need to start telling the people what's true and what isn't. What a broach on our freedom of speech. Pretty crazy during COVID, and we need some safeguards to make sure that doesn't get out of hand again, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's impossible to give just one example of how our constitutional rights have been trampled just in the last few years. I mean, go on and on. You can start in the first 7, well, the 7th article of the Constitution is the ratification clause, so I guess they didn't really trample that one. But if you go through the first 6, I mean, it's really disconcerting. We have efforts, you know, the Interstate Commerce Clause, for example, has been so manipulated that the government has regulated everything, and people recognize that are in business. It's absurd, and it's layered in regulation so much so that it's so difficult for businesses to function. You can go into the other clauses that talk about guaranteeing a Republican form of government. I mean, we have so much soft socialism going on right now across multiple states. I think that is even violated. But then you get into the, and even the article that says that we should, the government is supposed to protect us from invasion. And we know that Kerry Lake down in Arizona was actually going to invoke that clause, saying, look, you're failing at that job. So immigration, they've completely failed to take care of. But as has been mentioned here, I mean, the Bill of Rights, our first Bill of Right, and the whole role of government to protect our inalienable rights to life, liberty, and property, you know, freedom of speech has been just stepped all over with respect to big tech and how they're treated as, you know, producers instead of platforms instead of producers. We can go on, and I think that's what we need to address is that that regulatory reform and take that back.
I'm going to ask you one more question, and in the meantime, I'm also inviting Lisa Sandberg, so the county party chair. She's going to have a couple of questions for you as well. But while she's coming up, starting with you, Carolyn, the question for you is, what does it, and this will be the same question for all four of you, it's a 30-second question. What does it mean to you to be a Republican?
Yeah, I think that fundamentally, I like to say all the time that our Constitution is not radical. The Constitution is the negotiated middle for the formation of this nation. And I think that puts the Republican Party squarely in the middle of all sensible policy, right? Of everything that we should want. I really think it's about human flourishing. It's about a nation of freedom and liberty, and where individuals, I also like to say it's a party that recognizes the actual diversity of the individual. It's what we want, it's what we believe in, it's what we fight for. Live your life, and government needs to stay out in absolutely every way possible.
Well, I think of the Republican platform, excuse me, a little bit here in Utah. To me, to be a Republican largely means that we recognize that God is important in the public sphere, that he's been involved. He's been involved in the founding of our country, and he continues to be involved in our successes as a country. It also means that to be a Republican means that we believe in marriage between a man and a woman. We believe in the sanctity of life. We believe in a strong military. We believe that we've been given much as a country. We believe that we need to enforce our borders. I think it's a great platform we have as Republicans right now, especially in the state of Utah. I love our platform, so thank you.
To me, what it means to be a Republican is to believe in individual liberty above all, that I will fight for my liberty and for your liberty equally as hard. And if you go down the planks, the platform planks, we've got an incredible party platform and a belief in God, first and foremost, that we have inalienable rights, that they come from our Creator and not from government. If they came from government, they could be taken by government. And I think that is the revolutionary belief. That's what started this country. That's what republicanism is all about. We believe in inalienable rights. We believe that our rights come from that Creator, and that we are going to then put into practice that fundamental belief.
Can you repeat the question?
What does it mean to you to be a Republican?
See, that's what I was. So what it means to me to be a Republican, honestly, is that I don't have to change. The things that we have talked about tonight about the Republican Party, the platform, faith in God, capitalism, freedom, family, those things that are core principles, core values, core things that, in my opinion, make our nation great, that's who I am. And Rob asked a question in a debate in the congressional seat, second congressional seat. He said, what are you going to do to show your loyalty to the Republican Party? Do you remember this? And I told him, I wish I could answer that question because I'm loyal to one person, and that's God. And I'm grateful that the Republican Party values align with my principles. Thank you.
So for these next two questions, they'll come from Lisa. They will each be 1-minute questions. And Carolyn, we last started with you, so Josh, you're going to be starting these off.
I don't think this is it on? Yes, okay. All right, welcome to Dixie, AKA Washington County. We're so glad you're here. And we're excited to vet you and see how you feel about Southern Utah. So whenever you come to a debate or a forum or anything in Washington County, the very first question always asked is about water. And so we just want to know how familiar you are with our water issues and what, if anything, you as a senator can help with that.
Well, that's a good question, and I followed a little bit of it. I need to be more familiar with it, to be honest with you. I would study it out more than I have. I generally speaking think that Utah, as much as possible, should be the ones making the decisions for how the different assets, water assets, are handled in Utah. I think if we're going to operate the dams well, Utah ought to be right at the forefront of those decisions. So I guess that it's a tough call. There's tough issues with it, with housing and growth that we've had in Utah. I think it requires a lot of study and frankly, collaboration and probably some prayer, and I'll work at it for sure. But I like Utah to be involved as much as possible, the citizens of Utah. I think we have smart people here who can figure out solutions to problems.
Well, water is definitely a huge issue here in the state. I mean, we're the second most arid state in the country, and that's something as I've been traveling around. I mean, I've had issues in my own community in Riverton, and have fought effectively for reverse osmosis projects that we've implemented in a lot of our water well assets that we have, so that we can make that part of our culinary water supply. And we just did this here recently. We're deploying one on a well that will enable us to create about another 2,000 acre feet of water. And so it is very, very important. I understand the issues with respect to Colorado River water and how Utah needs to be able to have our water. We absolutely need to have that, and I know the Lake Powell pipeline project is very instrumental here and would provide a great source of additional water capacity for those here in Washington County. It's absolute. We got to ensure that those resources continue to flow here. This area is growing, and I would do all in my power as a senator to ensure that these types of vital projects, these infrastructure projects, which I feel are fundamental, are actually funded and taken care of.
So I served on the Central Utah Water Board for 8 years, and I understand very well the conflict that's going on with the lower basin and the upper basin, and the appropriation of water and how they have been utilizing our water in the lower basins for quite some time. And now that we're trying to develop those water rights, we're in legislation and having to fight that. As a senator, I would definitely be advocating for that project. In Roosevelt, Utah, we have 3 different sources of water. For a little town, we pack a strong punch. And we've planned ahead and we've looked at this, and you have to have a second source. I was talking to one of the councilmen of one of the cities here in this area, and he was saying the same thing. We have to have redundancy in the water. We are one of the most arid states in the United States, but water is the lifeblood of any community. You take water away and you don't have anything, and it is critical that we fight that battle. I've been involved with that. I understand that, and I would definitely be an advocate for that project, the Lake Powell pipeline project, and I would do anything in my power to make sure that goes through.
Okay, I will say I've dealt with some water issues, but it is not one of my strongest points. When David Bernhardt was Secretary of Interior, I had this conversation with him about the potential litigation at that time. It's been a few years. With the Colorado River, exactly what you're talking about, and the misallocation for many years of that water, or stealing, other people might say, use of water that belongs to others. And then as we have tried claiming water that really is ours, there have been some big issues. And one of the things that David said is we really need to be careful taking the litigation approach, because we could have our water rights completely taken away from us in that regard, and that's the last thing we would want as Utahns. I would need to get up to speed on that issue, as I have dealt with it, but it's been a couple years. And absolutely, we have to be providing water to our communities. We have to fight for the water that is rightfully theirs, that we know is theirs, that we have through compact been declared the owners of, and I would be a strong advocate for that in Utah.
Thank you. We appreciate you, let me just as a side note, we appreciate you coming to Washington County. We really do. As the 5th largest county in Utah now, we make a difference. And nobody's won a senator without carrying Washington County. So we encourage you to be here, be present, get to know us, and be aware of our problems. Okay, the other question that came up as I talked with our county commissioners and our other people who work in the county is prior to President Trump leaving office, like days prior to him leaving office, Senator Romney, whose place you would be taking, worked really hard to get passed legislation for our northern corridor. Now, I don't know if you guys have heard about that or not, but it's an important transportation area for us on the north side of our county to relieve some of the traffic on the south part of the county. Since that passed and then President Biden took office, that has now been in litigation for this many years. And even though it was passed and approved, we can't move forward on it. And so I'm wondering what, if anything, as a senator you can do to help with that issue, where Senator Romney got it passed for us, got it through for us, got President Trump's signature on it. Now what do we do?
No, and that Northwest Corridor is very, very important. I understand infrastructure issues. You know, as a mayor in South Salt Lake County, we have all kinds of growing pains, and this has been a big issue that we've been fighting to ensure that we've got adequate infrastructure, because we know where infrastructure precedes growth, the quality of life will continue to be maintained in a high state. If the infrastructure comes after that, that's when you're dealing with all the traffic and the craziness that really, really detracts from the quality of life. And we can't have that happen here in Washington County. So to the point where legislation is already passed, but monies were never appropriated for a project, that is something that I think will, as a senator, you can go back and work with other senators to ensure that that ends up becoming appropriated. And when we have President Trump back again, who signed this legislation, I'll be able to work with him and ensure that Utah gets, Washington County gets those the monies to be able to finish that project. Yeah, it's paramount that happens, and I think, you know, that's one of the things that I want to be able to work on is the various committees. I've asked, I would ask for finance, small business and entrepreneurship, and also natural resources, which encompasses public lands. And so I would work very, very hard with my colleagues in the Senate to get that done.
So my response would be similar to Trent's. Obviously, we have a similar situation in the Uinta Basin, where we've been working on a rail project for the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and it got passed, and it went through the red tape. And when President Trump was in office, everything was going very well. And then we got sued by the state of Colorado, and now it's in litigation. And so I understand exactly what you're going through. What can we do as a senator to do that? It's a very difficult question, but what we can do is, like Trent said, vote in elected officials and our president and others that have like-mindedness. The unfortunate thing is those things get litigated by, right now, in my opinion, liberal judges. And we we're not looking real good in Colorado to get a good outcome on that infrastructure project, and they'll probably make it up to the Supreme Court. And we're kind of hoping it does, because Trump did a good job at appointing really conservative justices. And so that's the other thing that we need to do, is make sure is that we're appointing conservative justices. Thank you.
So if I remember correctly, I also think one of the big problems with that rail project was that the Biden administration pulled back some of the approvals when they came in. And that was years of work where I was working closely with the people who were working on that project and the private companies who were doing that. I'll tell you, am I correct in that the litigation is over environmental issues? Yeah. That has been a consistent problem with the Northern Corridor. It's why it took so long for anything to happen there. And so we have a situation right now where environmental groups, Equal Access to Justice Act, AEGIS, I think it's called, environmental groups have this sue and settle thing with the federal government, and they consistently sue to block all kinds of development because apparently they don't believe in human flourishing like the Republican Party does and like we as conservatives do. And so there is so much when finally we get through all the red tape and are able to actually develop anything that benefits humans, we then end up in lawsuits. That, the Equal Access to Justice Act is something that absolutely has to be changed legislatively. As far as on this, if that could be changed quickly, we could maybe start making a difference, but I think it'll be a long process. I think on this, there might be some ways. I'll tell you, when I worked in the House and for Senator Lee, one of the things that I became very good at, or I always have been, I would say, is being able to, something Josh has talked about, to find other people's interests and find ways that what I want also is something that they want without me compromising on principles, but help them understand why my principles benefit them as well. And I think possibly legislatively there are some things that could be done in order to bring people around to fight back against some of these lawsuits that are taking place.
Well, those are pretty good answers by everybody else on that question. I liked what Carolyn said there at the end. I mean, it's kind of persuading people to see the benefit that they get as well. I mean, there's frivolous litigation that happens. You just have to kind of get to a common ground and build on some common sense sometimes. And I guess there might be a lack of that among certain groups in this country, but you know, you keep working at it, and you work with the mayors from the different communities. And I would say this to Senator, I've got a list of the mayors right now, and I've actually had a goal to kind of reach out and talk with the different city councils across the state, and I would be committed to that, to answering and responding and working with you. I'd say continue talking to your senators as much as you can, continue badgering them, and as a senator, I would commit that I will continue hearing you. I'll hear you, and I will work at it.
Thank you. Just wanted to remind you, or just encourage you and invite you after caucus, and we have our 300 delegates. We hope you'll come back and meet our delegates and get to know them and realize that Washington County wants to be involved. We want to give somebody our vote, so don't forget us. Don't forget those below the Payson-Dixie line.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. Very much appreciate that. I'll stress to what Lisa just said, highlighting the importance of Washington County. I want to point out that the very first location that we've had one of these events is where? It's off the Wasatch Front. It's here in Washington County. The state Republican Party realizes that Utah is a state of 29 counties, not 4 counties. And we very much appreciate all of our rural communities, not just the Wasatch Front. And I say that as somebody who lives on the Wasatch Front. So again, I want to thank, before we get into closing statements, remind all of you that we'll have a number of these engagements. I encourage you to reach out to all of these candidates individually, go onto their websites, vet them. Any of these candidates or other candidates that come forward, this is a unique opportunity for us to elevate our voice as Utahns to ensure that our next United States Senator is well versed on the issues and ready to hit the ground running on our behalf. I want to thank again the Institute of Politics and Public Affairs in their partnership. I also want to thank the Howard family, whose sponsorship of this helped the Republican Party not only do this event, but also get airtime. I'm sure a lot of you have heard the radio ads that we've had playing on multiple stations for a couple of weeks. So thank you to the Howard family. And with that, I'm going to ask each of you, and we're back to you, Rod, and so you will go all the way through. I want to ask each of you to give your 30-second elevator pitch. That's the amount of time that I'm giving you for your closing statement, your 30-second elevator pitch to all of these good Utahns as to why they should trust you with this important choice.
Well, I think you hit it on the head, Rob, right there, trust. One of the reasons that I got involved with this race was simply because I didn't feel that we were being represented how we should. And as I contemplated why we can't get good people to run for office that we can trust, that'll do what they say they're going to do, I had the thought that I cannot wait. I have to be that type of person. And that's why I ran for this seat. I have a lot to offer. Like I said, in the Uinta Basin, we have a diversity of issues. It's interesting how they align directly with the issues that we are facing as a nation right now. And if you elect me as your senator, you can trust that I will do what I say I'm going to do, that I will represent you in the way that you deserve and represent Utah in the way that it deserves. Thank you.
Yeah, I think if we want to keep getting the same kinds of results that we've gotten the past few decades, we should definitely keep electing the same types of politicians. We're $33 trillion in debt. We have a virtually open southern border. We have threats from enemies around the world, and we have very few solutions being presented, at least solutions that are getting any traction. I have a history of bringing people together. Try being a mother of 5 boys, none of whom are like any of the others. And you soon realize that you need to be a little creative in bringing people together for the same goal, because ultimately most of us truly want the same thing. I am one of you, and I will represent you well in Washington as your senator. CarolynForSenate.com.
Well, I know how to balance a budget. I said earlier that you vote who you are. And as an accountant, on an accountant's salary, with a wife and 6 little kids, we kind of have to balance a budget. It gets to be expensive, and accountants don't make as much as doctors. But we will vote who we are, and I can help us on the budget side. And I can help us on the issues for little kids and for families and for faith. And I am committed to those things. I am committed to help you to be able to have an environment where your families will thrive and you will be happy and able to have the blessings of your faith. And that's who I am, and that's who I would be in Congress.
Thank you, Rob. I feel like I need to stand, so I'm going to. Hey, look, like I said, this election is all about electing somebody to replace Mitt Romney who has demonstrated the resolve and the competence to fight for us. I've done that. I've done that for 10 years. You can go to TrentStaggs.com, take a look at my record, and see that I am a conservative fighter and proud fighter, and that's what we need, because the status quo is not working. It is just not working. $33.5 trillion in debt, this regulatory state that is just off the rails. We need somebody who has demonstrated that ability to fight, to get in there and do it. And that's exactly what I've done for 10 years and what I'll continue doing as your U.S. Senator. So please, take a look at TrentStaggs.com. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of the candidates. Thank you, all of you. Please stick around, those online and in person, for the second half of this evening here at Utah Tech. Specifically, it's our second Congressional District Forum. in preparation for that special election that is just a couple of weeks away. Also, one final pitch. There's that QR code, or utgop.org. You can jump on there to make a donation. And most importantly, March 5th, mark it down on your calendars. We look forward to you caucusing with the Utah Republican Party. Please join me in one more round of applause for our candidates.
He's doing it. Yeah, thanks. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Just wanted to let you know that a second event is going to start in about 5 minutes, and that will be our forum with Senator Kathleen Reby and Celeste Malloy for the 2nd Congressional District. So we hope you stay around, and we'll get started in about 5 minutes. Okay? Okay, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for hanging around and attending our next event, which is the 2nd District Congressional Forum with State Senator Kathleen Reby and Celeste Malloy. Before we begin, I'd like to thank the St. George Area Chamber of Commerce for being our co-sponsor for this event. I truly have valued their partnership over the years, and they've helped us out with a lot of political events. Along those lines, I'd like to introduce Kurt Ivey, who's the Washington City Councilman and also the Chamber's Public Policy Committee Chair. So, Kurt, would you like to come up and say a few words before we get started? Yeah.
Briefly, thank you. You know, the St. George Area Chamber of Commerce is very proud to co-host this event tonight. Chambers don't endorse platforms or parties or candidates, but we do advocate for business, because truly that's how you keep taxes low, is you bring in good quality commercial business that helps to sustain income into your general fund so you don't have to raise taxes. But tonight I welcome the candidates here today, and each of you, appreciate you being here. And my only message to our two candidates is that remember that we're down here. We're in southern Utah. We need help with some things. We have a unique place. We live in the most beautiful area in the entire world. We need some help with some water infrastructure, with the reuse pipeline and with the Lake Powell pipeline. And we need some transportation needs with the Northern Corridor and some other things. But welcome and thank you so much. And the Chamber is very proud to be a part of this, and we hope to continue that. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Kurt. Appreciate that. And I also want to reiterate that the Institute of Politics is a nonpartisan organization, non-ideological. So the Chamber and we share that together. Our format tonight is going to be 2 individual candidates. I'm going to meet with them one-on-one, and we're going to have a discussion format and not a debate, which they've done already. The order was selected by an online randomizer, and that online randomizer selected Senator Reby first, so she'll be joining me momentarily. We're excited about having both of these candidates come down here. This is a special moment for our city, for our university, and it's a special moment, I think, for southern Utah, and I think it illustrates the importance that Washington County and the surrounding areas have on Utah politics. So I'd like to, in line with that, ask the audience, as I did at the City Council debate, if you were there, to refrain from any sort of hissing or booing. We know that you're excited, and we want you to be excited. You should be excited about politics. But let's be respectful, and let's set a good example for the students here at the university. With that, I'd like to invite Senator Reby on stage, and we'll get started with our discussion. Okay. Does your mic work?
Yes, it is.
Okay, great, good. Well, let's get started then. Senator Reby is the Democratic candidate for the 2nd District, and she currently represents Utah's 15th District in the State Senate and is the Senate's Minority Whip. But that's just a short introduction. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself for the people out there that might not know about you? I know we're late in the campaign, but tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're running for Congress.
Tell me a little bit about myself. I'm a school teacher. I took today off so I could drive down here to be with y'all. I saw some school teachery friends out there that I recognize, so it's nice to see you down here and here. I'm a school teacher. I've been a school teacher for 22 years. I decided to run for the school board when, in 2016, when as a parent and as a teacher, I saw that the money wasn't making it all the way down to the classroom, and that really frustrated me. We do have one of the best economies in the nation, and when we think about that, we should also have some of the best schools in the nation. So I'd go up to the school board, I'd make public comment, I'd get engaged, and then I decided, hey, why don't I run? And I won that seat, and it was really exciting to serve in that capacity for 2 years. Prior to that, after that, I ran for Senate and won that seat flipped it, and so excited to do that as well. I've been on the Education Committee, the Transportation Committee, Government Ops. I'm on law enforcement interim committees, and it's been an incredible learning experience. And as you move across the state and as you move across different disciplines in the Senate, you start to realize that there's a lot of commonality across the state. Prior to being a teacher, I was a police dispatcher up in Alta. I drove a dump truck for a while. I was also a caterer. I was an outdoor educator. So I spent a lot of time just really enjoying life when I got out of college. And then when I figured I'd start teaching, I have 2 kids. They go to University of Utah and Brighton High School. Lacrosse players. I played lacrosse in college. I played rugby. Really, I love just outdoor sports, hiking, rafting, climbing a little bit. So just loved Utah. Been here for 33 years. We explore every corner of the state and just enjoy every part of it. So I fell in love with it the minute I got off the plane.
That's wonderful. Go ahead. Yes. You brought up education a lot, of course. You're a teacher. And so let's start with education, because it's not only important to you. We're at a university, and in an ABC Ipsos poll, 61% of the people said it was extremely important in terms of an issue. And we're going to talk about a few of those issues that people around the country and in Utah have put, up top. But surprisingly, most people are surprised, the United States spends close to the top in the amount of money per pupil in the United States, and yet we end up 34th in science and math and 25th. What are we doing wrong with that money that we have, and should we increase the spending? Federal government only spends about 8%. What are your thoughts on all of that? How can we make it better? Let's start with K through 12.
So I was sitting here during the last venue, and we heard that we want to defund the Education Committee in the federal government. You just mentioned we don't really invest a lot of federal money in education. I think that little bit of money provides some guardrails for our students and provides a framework that we can manipulate to meet the needs of Utah. When I was on the state board, we were very adamant that we weren't going to have a Common Core, we were going to have the Utah Core. So we moved it and we changed it to meet the needs of Utahns, and I think that's important. I don't think that there needs to be more federal government in our schools. I think it needs to be local money and local control. I don't think our education system is broken. I think that there's a lot of amazing things going on in our schools. There was a previous senator that was very involved in education. He compared us to other countries. The United States has every student go to school or have an opportunity to get an education. And we've provided so many opportunities for so many different methods of types of education, where you want to go, how you want to do it, online, homeschool, charter, private. We have a robust system. And so when we think about why we're not compared favorably to maybe Finland or something else like that, we have a different system. And so we also have a very diverse population that we honor, and we also meet the needs of people who speak many languages. One of the schools I taught at had 67 languages in that school alone, of like 400 kids. That's incredible. I have actually been in a school just this last week where there are 3 different languages being spoken, and 2 of them were not really proficient in English. And so, I mean, to think that our teachers can actually meet the needs, be diverse enough, and have an education in that kind of venue is incredible. I think what we need to start working on is, when we think about who's not successful in reading, it's our English language learners, and there's a lack of resources for that. And I think we really need to start looking at that. We have been really a great state to take in other refugees, and that's something that we have been proud of. And so when we think about how we're going to meet the needs of those people, we need to start meeting them where they're at. The other group that's not reading on grade level is students with IEPs and 504s and special education plans. And so those 2 categories are always going to struggle with taking a standardized test at grade level. but they are succeeding and they are doing better. So if we took those two variables out of that equation, I bet that number would be closer to 80% people reading on grade level.
Many in the Republican Party support a voucher system. Is that something you support or oppose?
The people of Utah do not support a voucher system, and they haven't in the past. When we had that bill come to the floor, SB 215, we had a conversation about a family who did whatever they could to get their kid to school. And I said, well, I teach kids who don't have parents that can get them to school. And if we're gonna give $9,000 as a voucher to another system, but the WPU in our public schools is $3,800, I don't really think that that's right. I think if that $9,000 can buy those kids a better experience, then $9,000 should be paid for every student. And if you're going to tell me that there's a better experience for $9,000, well, let's get that better experience for every kid. And so I did not support the voucher system. I do not support the voucher system, but I think that education is doing a lot of great things. And I do appreciate the flexibility of our education system in the state of Utah.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
I asked my students, to submit a number of questions. One of the ones that came out on top was about education, and I doubt you'll be surprised about this. They said, how can you as a representative help to reduce our student debt?
Being on the Higher Education Committee, I can tell you the state of Utah has not raised tuition in a really long time, which is incredible. But my son just started at the university, and they asked for all these fees. I'm like, these are kind of raising tuition if you're going to start asking for fees. We have a lot of opportunities, so if you really wanted to control student debt, you could go to a tech college or a community college ahead of time to actually mitigate your cost. Those universities actually have an opportunity, and tech colleges have a complete acceptance of those credits, which is incredible. It's a really amazing system. We do fantastic things in the higher education system here. As far as expensive schools, it's almost a race to the top. There's a group that was raising money for schools, and I just paid the tuition for my son. I'm like, you're kidding me, you're calling me asking for a donation? I just wrote you like a $20,000 check. And they said, well, I look at a pool, there's a climbing wall. I mean, these are great things, but maybe we need to start figuring out what our schools are for so we can start reducing those prices. Also, if you're a commuter, why should you be paying for some of the stuff that's happening on your campuses? Maybe you should have a different plan. If you're like, I'm just coming here for an education, I'm not going to partake in any of those other situations. A cafeteria plan that might provide you with a better opportunity. If you're working full-time like I did through college, I didn't swim in the pool, I didn't climb on the climbing wall, I didn't get to take part in those things. So maybe that's something we can look at. I'm not sure, but I'm open for any options.
As long as reducing costs doesn't get rid of an institute of politics, right?
I think that's the highest thing we should be paying for,
okay.
Maybe even more. We're gonna pass around a bucket, and all of you can start donating.
There we go. We'll go for that. You're not going to be surprised by this one either. The number one issue when people were surveyed in that Ipsos ABC poll was inflation. And I think most people don't understand what the Fed does. I think most people don't understand what macroeconomics in general is about. However, people do know their personal lives, and they do know the prices of the things that they buy. Now, the annual inflation rate in September for the year preceding was about 3.7%. It's way down, but it's still higher than we want. And people are blaming President Biden in most of the polls. So what, if anything, can Congress do to help get inflation under control?
Thank you for that question. There's a lot that goes into inflation, like you just said. This morning, I was walking my dog, and we were talking about how my interest rate on my house was at like one of the lowest interest rates in a really long time. And the lady that was walking her dog with me, she's like, my interest rate was 11%, and that was 20 years ago. And I said, oh my gosh, we got in just at the right time. And now it's somebody else who's looking at buying a house at 8%. So we remember what it's like to be at 3%. So we think right now it's super high, but if you go back maybe, 20 years, it was just as high. So, it's going to go like this a lot. And that's part of everything. Inflation is something that's improving, yet we are not really feeling it yet. We're kind of still like hurting. So we are coming out of a lot of crises, and we're also in the middle of some crises. So we have to start thinking about how we can start moving forward when things become more secure. The analogy I use is like, if your car's broken down and your house is on fire, it's not the time to start, cutting your budget. You're just trying to get over that problem. Something that we could start thinking about is Social Security and how that's impacting our deficit and how we could restructure it, We have a cap that's not that high, and so we could extend that cap, and then maybe we could make Social Security more solvent, so we wouldn't be thinking about that looming debt. And another thing we can look at is these expiring tax cuts that really aren't helping the middle class or the lower income earners. They're going to sunset in 2025, and I think that would start bringing more money into the economy. That would start to release some of those levers that would start to affect inflation.
Okay, thank you. Serena Cervantes is the president of the Pre-Law Society, and she submitted a question, and I'd like to read it to you. She asked, there has been a shortage of affordable housing in this area. If you are elected, and throughout the state, if you are elected, how will you help families get more affordable housing for young adults, low-income families, and the homeless? And is that something that, as a representative, you'd be able to do?
As a state representative, I think that that's something that you'd be able to handle better at the state, but there are federal programs that we can use to help people that are working towards having a more stable life. I frequently talk about my friend Carol Spackman-Moss, who's a representative, and when her husband just passed away, and prior to that she had gotten a divorce, and she said her house was her rock. It was the thing that she actually used the most to leverage any type of instability in her life. So for me, it's really important that people have that rock, all of us have a hard day and we go home and the first thing we do is we're so happy to be in a quiet, safe space. And so when as a teacher, I look at some of the kids that I've worked with that are homeless, and they never have that. They never have an experience of a quiet, safe space in their life, and it's traumatic. So in the state of Utah, we actually ran a bill that would provide people with grants if they were first-time home buyers and they were buying a new home. I think we need to start looking at providing those types of assistance for kids that are trying to get into a home, no matter whether it's new or old. I've also was talking to the Utah Foundation last night, and we were talking about how these companies are coming in and buying all these homes and then renting them back. This is inflating all of our rent and all of our home prices. So maybe looking at a way to curtail these big corporations coming in and taking blocks of homes and then renting them out. This isn't helping the average person acquire a home. And with all these people renting, it's just increasing the rent and increasing the rent. So I think we're going to have to get creative, and we're also going to have to look at seeing what's happening. I think we're trying to apply old answers to new questions. I mean, when we started thinking about this, we didn't have Airbnb and short-term rentals and the internet that made it so easy to do these things. So I think we have to start looking at some new solutions.
It didn't rate extremely high on that ABC Ipsos poll that I was talking about, but when I talk to people in Washington County, I can assure you that a huge number of them are concerned about spending at the federal level and the deficit and the debt. We're at a $1.7 trillion deficit. We're at a $33 trillion debt, and if we had the clock up here, we would, I don't know how many millions we'd add. Yeah. You've said that we need to distribute the tax burden more fairly. Am I correct in saying that? But you also believe, you said, in fiscal responsibility. And so I'm wondering, how do you find that balance between those two? Do you think we can get sufficient tax money from the wealthy in order to help fix the deficit and start paying down on the debt? Or is it cutting spending?
I think it's both. I think it has to be both. We have a lot of special interest groups. We have a lot of contracts that have gone over bid and have been extended. I think we all need to be a little bit more accountable and a little bit more transparent. When I think about education, which has been referred to as a black hole when it comes to money, I'm like, well, we have this mentality of use it or lose it. I think that has to go away. We have to start saying this is the amount of money you're going to get, and if you want to have something, let's fund what you need, but not just always have this increasing dollar amount. I know in education.
Where would we cut? I'm sorry to interrupt,
Oh,
but
that's okay.
where would we cut? Because Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, if you include the ACA in with that, defense spending, interest on the debt, and other non-discretionary spending like veterans benefits, you get up to 85% of the federal budget. That only leaves 15% discretionary spending. So I always wonder with candidates, where would we cut if we were to try to pull that back? Would it have to be those entitlements and that mandatory spending?
I don't think entitlements are entitlements. I think they're things that you've invested in your whole entire life. I've invested in their Social Security my whole entire life. That's not an entitlement to me. That's something that I've earned and I've worked for. And I think everybody should have that. I have a good friend that I taught with, and she passed away, and her daughter received a death benefit. And I think that's an incredible honor. That's honorable. That's humane, and that's what we should be doing as a society. Cutting spending, we had during COVID, we all went back. We got called into session. We had to cut the budget 5%, 10%, 25%, depending on where we went. And we cut across the board with everything. And so in every area of our spending, we all need to start looking at what's a need and what's a wish. I mean, we have contracts in every sector that are not being fulfilled to their honest obligation. I know that 2 years ago we had a RISE test. It was a statewide contract that we worked really hard to get, and they didn't fulfill their obligation. And we put in that RFP, a request for proposal, clawbacks. And every time that they didn't meet their needs, we clawed it back. And so we invested a smaller amount of money because we held that contractor accountable. If you look at some of the contracts we have in defense, they're not being held accountable. If you look at some of our contracts we're having in healthcare, they're not being held accountable. So we need to figure out a way to be more accountable to the money we're spending and actually have clawbacks for companies that we're partnering with to make sure that we are not wasting money. It can be done, I believe.
Okay, great. You mentioned healthcare. That came in at 64% for people. It's 18.3% of our GDP. That's $13,000 per person. That's how much we spend on healthcare in this country. It's the average amongst wealthy nations is about $6,400. Yet we rank 23rd. And about 25 million people are uninsured. Medical debt is the leading cause of bankruptcy. What can we do? What should we do? Who's to blame? The government, insurance companies, all the above? How do we make it better?
I would definitely say all the above. We are all to blame. I think for a while when I was moving from job to job, I had to go without insurance. That's crazy. Like to be 25 and living without insurance and having a car accident or a terrible fall and being stuck with all that debt, that shouldn't be something that dictates your whole entire life. Last year, I had a terrible accident. I hurt my neck really badly. It was terrible, and I had to take time off of work, and I was so, I thought every day, I'm like, I am so fortunate that I have a job that protects me, takes care of me, invests in me. I mean, I couldn't even imagine going to work with a broken neck, doing anything. And so that was the job that I had chosen and protected me. But I mean, what a great thing for me. And I'm like, everyone should have this security. I mean, to think about every day not to do something. The kids in my school, we go on ski trips. That's paid for by the state, a great program to get kids out there. Parents will call and say, I can't have my kid go because we don't have insurance. If they break their leg or break their arm or get hurt, we couldn't absorb that cost. So for that to be like the underlying thing that makes you choose how to live your life, that's not really what we should be choosing to spend all of our time thinking about. We have worked towards getting more people on insurance. I think that when people are not insured and they wait till it's the worst case scenario, that's more expensive. So when we think about how we can try to level the cost, it's not by having major accidents and paying for them and then avoiding getting any kind of preventative care and then having to get all that care. So trying to create a level playing field where the cost is always the same. I think getting more people onto insurance and then also providing that stability of having it be more affordable. When we went to the Affordable Care Act, we had small businesses that were struggling with that. We can help them. I mean, we are the greatest nation. We are the first world nation. We can figure out a way. We have lots of smart minds. It's just a matter of being willing to come to the table and not saying, you know, this is my piece of pie. I'm gonna stand on this and never give it up. We have to start looking at what's working and what's not. And there's quite a lot to grow there. There's a lot that's not working, but we can change, and we should.
Okay, thank you.
It makes me feel so good that you guys are clapping.
It's been a long time since Congress obeyed regular order and passed appropriations and spending bills. We have 11 days from today until a government shutdown. Do you support a shutdown to control spending? Okay. Easy enough? We'll stick with the no? And
No, I do not support a government shutdown. I do not support what's happening in Congress right now. I'm devastated that the people of the United States are going to be left wondering what's happening to their world by this shutdown. I'm also devastated by the fact that we can't appoint military personnel. These things should be happening. It's the job that we're getting sent there to do. We should be working with anyone to make that happen. The government is our job, and we should make it work for the people of the United States. And it's awful. I would never support a government shutdown.
you've actually made democracy in general a part of your campaign, at least as near as I could tell. Can you unbox that for us, unpack that rather?
My freedom first.
You're concerned about democracy in general.
Yeah, you know, when we think about what's happening with our three branches of government, I mean, it's been super messy the last couple of years, and we've used every branch of government to the fullest extent. And I've taught school, and we talk about the three branches of government in 5th grade and 3rd grade and 2nd grade. And to see that the judicial branch and the legislative branch and the executive branch are constantly having to put each branch back in check is a testament to how well the system works. But unfortunately, we are spending way too much time fighting amongst the legislative, executive, and judicial branch. I struggle with how we have had some of our liberties taken away. I was a very outspoken opponent of the abortion bill that we passed. And I think it's something that we need to start recognizing that local control is with my body. I really struggle with the thought that if something happened to my daughter, she'd be forced to have a baby. And we're seeing these kind of things. Thank you. I mean, I also had a miscarriage. I can't imagine having to sit in the parking lot waiting for a worst case scenario before they'd say, all right, it's gonna be your life, so come on in now, we'll give you the care you need. That's alarming to me. As a mother, as an aunt, as a sister, as a neighbor, we have to give that agency back to the people that I trust you all to make the right decisions for your family. And that scares me. That really scares me. It scares me for my daughter. It scares me for every person I know. Families really need those opportunities. If you are part of a situation where you have an illness in your life that you couldn't carry a baby to term, that's your decision for your family. You shouldn't have to ask somebody's permission to take care of your family. I mean, losing a caretaker is devastating if you're going to ask somebody to make that decision. So I think that's part of democracy, giving people the right to make their decisions. And giving, thank you.
And so we have this division, but yet you and Celeste Malloy have ran a very civil campaign, and both of you have talked about bipartisanship and that you would be bipartisan if you were to go into Congress. What areas do you think you could find agreement on?
I would find an agreement on anything. I'm a Democrat in the state of Utah, and every bill that I've passed, which isn't that many because they get stuck a lot, but I've had to reach across the aisle. I've voted on many bills from Republicans that are good for the people of Utah. I look at what needs to happen to help the people of Utah, and I don't care who's running that bill. If it's good for Utah, I'm going to support it. If it's good for the people at every table, I'm going to support it. I don't really look to see who's running it. I understand what's good and bad.
Okay.
When I get to Washington, I'm going to look for allies. I'm going to look to people who want to work together. We have to start reaching across the aisle, and we have to start working together. Thank you. The 8 Republicans that hijacked our government and kept us without a speaker, that's not okay. The Democrats and the Republicans that let those 8 people hold that control, that shouldn't have happened. Somebody should have been the adult in the room and reached across the aisle and said, we're going to support this moderate speaker, and let's start getting the work of the people done.
Okay, thank you. I've held events on this issue. I've had conversations in countless numbers of classes. So I'm going to ask this question to you and to Ms. Malloy in precisely in the same manner and verbatim. Okay, here we go. In polling, this district has shown strong support for the Second Amendment. The 2 reasons I hear the most are self-defense and a bulwark against tyranny. The U.S., though, has a problem with mass shootings, gun homicides, and guns are the leading cause of death in children. I've also read, though, that guns were used on 176,000 instances of self-defense 2 years ago. So, do you see the problems that are associated with this as something that can be addressed by Congress, particularly in light of the Supreme Court rulings since 2010?
I have taken a vow to support the Constitution, and the Second Amendment is part of the Constitution. My husband owned guns. My dad was a police officer. My brother's a police officer. There's been plenty of guns in my life. I believe they are something that if you're going to hunt and get food and you want to protect yourself, I support that tremendously. A couple of months ago, I met with the gang unit in South Salt Lake, and the officers gave us an hour-and-a-half conversation about what was happening in our schools. And, they turned to me and they said, they have this little plug that you can put in the back of a weapon and it causes it to fire nonstop. And it's not like a bump stock, it's something different. And I forget the name of it, but they said, I show up to work every day frightened of the fact that I'm going to meet a 14-year-old, 15-year-old, 13-year-old that got his hands on a handgun, and now I'm going to have to shoot him before he shoots me. That's a devastating thing to think about. We were in school this year, and we've already done our first lockdown. We've had fake lockdowns for weapons, and gun. There's a SWAT. There's a weapon in the school. We're going to have to shut it down. They've been swatted. This is not what was intended. And as a mother and a person who shops and goes to houses of worship and goes to concerts, I'm alarmed. I'm alarmed, and it's scary that you have to think about where your exits are all the time and how you're going to protect yourself with the seat. I mean, is that seat bulletproof? Are you ready to get behind that seat? Are you going to run for that door? Which door are you going to go to? Are you going to hide underneath the stage? Are you going to pull somebody that got shot on top of you? That we have to think about this in this country is what used to have to happen in Israel. I mean, we have to come up with some solutions, and I don't care what first step we take, but we should be able to come up with a solution together. I had a conversation with somebody who is very pro-gun, and I said, tell me what your first step would be. I'll meet you at your first step, as long as you can come up with anything. And so I'm willing to start anywhere. I'm willing to start with any type of change, but the fact that the leading cause, one of the studies out there says the leading cause for child death is guns right now, and I find that unacceptable. I'm sorry.
You mentioned Israel. That was the other question. Israel and Ukraine were questions that I got from my students. That was at the top. And they have a great deal of concern about what's going on in Israel. So let's start with that. There seems to be some collapsing support for Israel that's on the left. Some people are blaming TikTok and that sort of thing. And there seems to be kind of a moral equivalency between Israel and Hamas. Where do you stand on the conflict between Israel and Hamas? And do you support Israel? And if so, in what ways?
So I've had a lot of constituents actually call me on the phone and ask me where I stand. And the reason why I reference Israel is I also referenced Ireland. My family's from Ireland, and they were part of the Troubles, and that had ended. I mean, these are decades-long fights that we've been in the middle of. And right now I believe there needs to be a ceasefire. I just, looking at what's happening in those communities, what's happening to those families, they're trapped, they can't get out. I think we need a ceasefire, and we need to start to come back at it in a different way. It also needs to be contained. It can't pass Israel and Gaza. It has to be contained, and we have to figure out a way to come at this a different angle, because it's a humanitarian crisis right now. There are too many civilians that are being unduly tortured, and it's just awful.
What about in the Ukraine? There's a number of people in the other party that say that the funding for Ukraine should stop, that we should stop sending aid. Biden's proposing, I think, an additional $61 billion for aid to Ukraine. Do you support that?
I do support Ukraine because I don't believe that we should be having bigger countries overtaking smaller countries. I don't believe Putin doing what he's doing is okay, and I think Ukraine should be supported. We have we've frozen some of their assets so that we will not be on the hook for rebuilding, but we have to honor our allies, and we have to honor the sovereignty of that nation. You know, I mean, I think we need to stand with our allies and not be swayed by horrific events, but I think a ceasefire and supporting Ukraine right now is where we have to be.
Okay, thank you.
It's also affecting us globally. These relationships we're having is undermining the security of everyone. And so when we think about inflation, we have to look there too. I mean, if we can't have stability globally, we can't have stability here in our nation.
Yeah. Utah Tech has a new climate resiliency center, and it's designed to evaluate the effects of climate change on our local area. What's your position on what the U.S. should be doing to address this issue? We had recently a speaker come out, and he was Republican, and said that we needed a carbon tax, that would incentivize the private sector to find a solution. What's your position, let's say, on a carbon tax, and what else should we do you think, on the issue of climate change? They're actually hosting an event right now, but yeah.
I believe climate change is real. I think there's a lot of science behind climate change. I think if we're going to get serious about climate change, we need to actually admit that it's happening and honor the science behind it. A carbon tax would be great if you aren't going to have a carbon trade-off where you could actually buy carbon trade-offs, which has happened in the past as well. Bigger nations are buying the carbon taxes and smaller nations are absorbing them. What we're seeing in Acapulco just last month with these violent storms, we see them in Florida, we see them in New York. We're going to start to see them more tornadoes, and bigger snowstorms and bigger flash floods. It's not like we can say it's someplace else. It's on everybody's front door now. And for a while we can say, oh, we'll just dedicate some money to take care of that problem. We'll dedicate some money to take care of this problem. It's everywhere now, and we have to start addressing it instead of dealing with the aftermath. So I would be in favor of a carbon tax. I'd be in favor of anything that started looking at this as a problem that we can start to deal with instead of just saying we're going to repair the damage. We've actually taken steps to not allow people to have houses closer to the ocean. Well, maybe we need to start thinking about how far you can encroach into the forest, you know? I mean, we have to start thinking more economically as well as environmentally how this is impacting us. Sorry.
Oh,
Go ahead.
no, I'm sorry. The word on everyone's lips around here is the word water. Does the federal government have a role, do you think, in our current water crisis?
Well, when I ended that, I was going to talk about Color Country
sorry,
and how
cut
they
you off.
started the gray water facility there. I mean, that's really innovative and exciting, and I think that more of this needs to happen. We, at the state, we're trying to change the way we're looking at some of our water practices. I know that there's a bill coming out where we're just going to start to cover all the canals, which would save a lot of evaporation. We have the Great Salt Lake, which we were just told in the session that was here, half of the lake is dead. So there's a lot of questions, and there's solutions out there, but they're going to be sometimes expensive. When we think about infrastructure and the infrastructure bill that just came from the federal government, I think that's going to help southern Utah a lot with the inland port that's in Iron County and bringing some jobs, but also creating better waterways for being more efficient. I think a lot can be done at the state, but our water doesn't just come out of the ground at the state. It comes from other states and it trickles through the state, so it has to be a partnership with the states around us. And so having the federal government try to mitigate that conversation would be beneficial, but we all have a hand in it. We can't say that it's just a state issue. It's going to have to be part federal.
I know that you have spoken about public lands quite a bit. A number of people contacted me before this forum, and they wanted to express concern about public lands. And it was interesting because some of them were contacting me to express the concern that they wanted to protect the public lands. The other side was saying they wanted to keep the federal government off of public lands. I know you care deeply about this issue, and so I just want to know where you stand on balancing that concern.
The system we have in place right now is not really working. I think it's very tenuous, it's contentious, it's a fight, it's a push and pull. There's many precedents right now for people creating stewardships and partnerships with their local communities. I was reading about Beaver having their largest employer pull out of their community, and now they're looking to tourism and how that's been a great asset for them. We have to look at ways where we can create a partnership. So like we talk about lumber in this area, and they said the reason why it's not feasible is because it's a 5-year contract. So let's create a 20-year contract where you can actually have stability and you can earn money and you can take some resources off the land, because while we were driving down here, we were saying, is that a fire over there? That's a pretty big fire. We have our fuels in our forests are incredible. So we're not doing great. We can do better. So I think the people that are closest to those parks and public lands should have a say in how we operate them and take care of them. But, you know, also when we did have that fire up in Spanish Fork, it was millions and millions of dollars that it took to mop it up. And it was nice to have that partnership with the federal government to help us with that part of it. So we have to start building a better partnership and giving more say to our local communities, and then also giving some scaffolding from the federal government. I believe we can make a lot of money from our public lands, but I also believe the people in the future should be able to make money off of them and also recreate on them. So I think there's a path there, and once we start fighting and we can start asking other communities, how would you like to be a partnership? How would you like to be a stewardship? What's your plan for this? I think that's something we have lots of abilities and space to grow in.
Okay, thank you. I got 2 more questions for you.
Okay.
One is, I taught a class on global inequality, and we've had an explosion of inequality in this country and actually around the world. Some people are calling it a new Gilded Age. Yet, worldwide, we've seen billions of people lifted out of poverty and lots of available new products, you know, for consumers and that sort of thing. What fascinated me about it was conservative social scientists and liberal social scientists were concerned about the issue because inequality can potentially lead to instability in a democracy and unhappiness. And I was just curious, would you address that issue? Is that an important issue to you? And how would you address that issue if you did?
It is an incredible issue. I took a trip with my kids for a month in a car. The first day, the kids were like, "We hate this." I'm like, "Oh, maybe this wasn't a good idea." But we traveled all around the country, went to all these national parks, and we ended up having a good time after we got over some hurdles. But we went to World War I Museum, and then we also went to the World War II Museum. And when you talked about why these conflicts happened, it was the gap between the haves and the have-nots. And we're there again. We have situations where you can work 40 hours a week and not have a living wage. And you can have two family members working 40 hours a week and not being able to buy a house, pay for their groceries, have a car. This instability creates a lot of tension. And so if you are going to work that hard and not get what you think is a piece of the pie or the American dream, you're going to be angry and you're going to want to take it out on somebody. So this is creating instability. I think the gap needs to be changed. I think that the people that are the lowest earners are absorbing a higher percentage of tax burden than the highest earners. Our highest earners have dividends, they have stock options. These things are not being taxed, but this is how they make their money. Yet when I go to work, I have a higher tax burden than somebody that earns more than I do. I think that can be changed so that everybody has a more equitable tax burden. I shouldn't spend most of my money on taxes and not be able to take care of my family.
Okay, thank you. Final question, and it's an other question. And is there an issue that hasn't been sufficiently addressed in this campaign, do you think, either in the debates or in the forums? Is there something that stood out to you that hasn't been asked? I mean, there's, countless issues that we could discuss, but is there something that you'd like to talk about that we haven't discussed?
I think that something that is always there, and I heard people reference it about southern Utah and Washington County and then Salt Lake County and Utah County. When we at the legislature try to pass a bill, I'll go into a room with all the school board superintendents and like, oh, if you get that, then I lose this, and if you get this, I lose that, and if I lose this, you get that. And that tension between counties and counties of the first class, counties of the second class, that's something that we talk about a lot. But as I've moved from city to city and county to county, I'm going to tell you that all of us feel the same responsibilities towards our families. We all feel the same struggles with health and mental health and suicide and gun prevention. And so I think that as we talk about which county we're from, we should remember that we're from Utah. And when Utah grows, everyone grows. When Utahns are doing better, every Utahn is getting better. And I have actually said to superintendents, I'm like, you know what, sometimes you're going to have to take a hit on this one so that we can help the kids here because they might need it more. But when you ask us, we'll remember that. And so we can't always be weighing the scales, comparing one county to the other county, because healthcare, climate, air quality, affordable housing, that's on everybody's mind. So when we solve these problems for Utah, we solve them for everyone. And I think we need to stop trying to battle between counties and the haves and the have-nots. When we work together, we all succeed. And I would really like to see more of that in the state of Utah, across every county and across every school district.
Okay. All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Reby.
Oh, Kathleen Reby, I'm running for Congress. Thank you.
Yeah, always ask for the vote. Yeah, nice to meet you. Thank you for coming in. Appreciate it. Okay, our next candidate is Celeste Malloy, the Republican that's running for the 2nd Congressional District seat. She's a former chief legal counsel to Chris Stewart, who is the retiring representative. So would you please give a warm welcome to Celeste Malloy, and we'll have a discussion with her.
Vince, anybody who came for the Senate debate's been sitting for more than 2 hours. Can we just take like 2 minutes and let everyone stand up?
Yeah, sure. Would you like to do exercises together? I think that's a great idea.
Maybe we can do one of those primary songs where you get the wiggles out.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that sounds good. Stretch for a bit.
I'm willing to give up a couple of minutes of time just to...
That sounds fine.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. How many votes do you think you won doing that?
At least half of them.
Okay. How are you feeling? Great? Yeah? All right. Hey, thanks to everyone who stayed for both events. You reminded me that, yeah, that can be, for someone like me, it's a great time, right? I'd like to stay for 4 or 5 more events, but for normal people, that's a lot. So thank you for that. Well, hello. We just met for the first time today, which was,
we did, which is weird. We should know each other.
It was a surprise to me. Like I said, you're the Republican candidate for the 2nd Congressional District. You were Chris Stewart's chief legal counsel. And we'd like to get to know you a little bit better as well. I know we're late into the campaign, but like Senator Reby, what would you like this audience in Southern Utah to know about you? And why are you running for Congress?
Great questions. I decided to run for Congress because I have been working for Congressman Stewart. I've been close to the process, and I've seen how much it matters to have a representative who cares about the local issues, the things that aren't necessarily going to make the national news. I think everybody knows that if you're a member of Congress, you vote on big national issues. And a lot of organizations make scorecards that are based on those issues, and it's really easy to track where somebody is nationally. But there are members of Congress who are really good at showing up and serving their constituents locally on the issues that have a federal nexus but aren't going to make big national scorecards. It's harder to keep track. It's harder to take credit. And so anybody who's doing a good job of that is doing it because they care about their constituents. And now that I've seen that and I've seen it done well, I wanted to be a representative like that. I realized when Congressman Stewart announced he was resigning that I could either hope somebody would run for this seat and be that kind of representative, or I could run and make sure I'm that kind of representative. And I knew it was a long shot. I don't have a lot of experience running campaigns. This is my first one. I didn't have a campaign team. I didn't have money. I didn't have a lot of name recognition. But I thought, if it matters to me this much, I should probably try it. And it's been amazing. You can see how many people are still sitting here. The constituents have stepped up in ways that just absolutely warm my heart. People showed up all summer. This is a special election. No one was expecting it. And in 100+ degree weather in St. George, I held outdoor rallies and people came. I showed up at Rotary clubs and parks, and I just kept getting in front of everybody I could possibly get in front of and talk about why I want to run, and people kept showing up and they kept listening and they kept asking good questions. And it's been a really great experience. And now I can't remember what the other half of the question was. Why do I want to run, and what else did you ask?
Yeah, no, I think that's sufficient. Just about your background and why you want to run. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've spent my adult life in this district. I went to SUU. I have an agriculture degree from SUU. And when I graduated from SUU, I moved to Beaver. And I was there for almost 10 years working with farmers and ranchers. And that was something that came pretty naturally to me. And I really liked the work. But I was working with the same kind of people that I've spent my whole life around, people who are dependent on natural resources to make a living. And a lot of the inputs to their livelihood are controlled by the government. And they're being governed by policies that they don't feel like they can control. And I felt the same way, and I decided that I needed to do something to try to change policies instead of just explaining them or implementing them.
So you talked about a kind of representative. Were you referring to Chris Stewart? I mean, is that how you would model yourself in terms of how you would be a representative of the district?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time working with Congressman Stewart before I worked for him. I was working here in Washington County. I was a deputy county attorney, and I did public lands work for the county. And because public land is federally managed, I spent a lot of time working with the Utah delegation. And I have said this a lot of times on this campaign, and I really mean it. Working with Chris Stewart restored my faith in our system of government. Like, I didn't know that representatives would represent on that micro of a level. Seeing him show up and help fix issues in Washington County reminded me that that's what representation is supposed to look like. And it doesn't have to be a big national issue to get the attention of a representative. A representative should show up for the locals.
You mentioned...
Thank you.
You mentioned public lands, and so I'm going to jump 5 questions down because we have someone here with us. His name is Roland Hall. He's actually a World War II veteran. Roland, are you here?
He's also one of my favorite people.
Thanks for being here, Roland. And I received his question today, and I said yes. He wanted to direct it to you, so I put it in here. Thank you for being here, Roland. And World War II. I mean, that's extraordinary. So we're really happy to have you here. His question was, what will you do to protect public access to roads on public lands established by right of use, even if not regularly maintained?
Great. That is a really good question. Sorry. I've got a microphone. I'm going to abuse my authority for a second here. Okay. It's Veterans Day this weekend, and Roland's here, and he served in World War II, and he's in uniform. Can we just...
Yeah.
Roland, will you stand up for a second?
I think he did.
Can we just give him a round of applause? Thank you for indulging that.
Of course.
And thank you for the question, Roland. I know why he asked this. So we've known each other for several years because when I was a deputy county attorney, we worked together on the RS 2477 roads litigation. And for people who don't spend all of their time thinking about public lands and access, I will explain what that is. So I was going to go back to the 1877 mining law, but I'll give you a quicker answer than that. So Utah has been in litigation with the federal government for years now over roads that, because they've been in use, the law used to say that title to those roads transferred to the state and local government. That changed in 1976, and so there are a bunch of roads that are in dispute. There are people who want the roads to be closed because that would make areas eligible for wilderness. The state wants the roads open and is claiming title to them. So they've been in litigation. And one of the ways of trying to prove that a road was in existence before 1976 is to interview somebody like Roland who was out using roads before 1976. So he and I drove a bunch of roads together, and then I deposed him as an attorney and got him on the record talking about the roads that he's used and what he used them for and establishing that they were there. And it's a really important issue. It's one that's been going on for a long time. It sort of happens mostly out of the public eye, but it's important to the state and to the counties because having those roads maintains access to areas. And if they don't have title to the roads, then access can be cut off. And in a public land state like Utah, where the federal government manages most of the land, that the state and the local government spend a lot of time working to preserve access. And that's something that I have worked on for a lot of years, intend to continue working on. It really matters if you live here that you can access the resources that are in your own backyard.
So I think it's fair to assume that the question I asked Senator Reby about the balance between protecting public lands and the federal government's involvement, would it be fair to say that you fall on the side of getting the federal government out more than it is currently, or?
So I was.
By the way, I'm surprised you're friends with anyone you ever deposed. I deposed a lot of people, and they didn't like me.
I don't know if it's a testament to my skill as a lawyer as much as it is to Roland Hall's character that he's still willing to be friends with me. But yeah, that is kind of amazing. I wasn't in here during the last section, so I didn't hear what was said. So you might have to tell me.
I asked Senator Reby about the balance between protecting public lands and public use of public lands. And then I hear from a lot of people that the federal government is too intrusive. And it seemed to me from her response that she was in favor of protecting public use and public lands and didn't fall necessarily on the side of, well, the federal government is doing too much within public lands. But I don't want to misquote her, but it seems like there's a difference between the two of you on this.
Well, I will tell you where I am, and then I'll let the audience decide whether we're the same or different. I've spent a lot of my life working on public lands issues, and the federal government is too involved in our day-to-day lives because they manage most of the land in the state. Our local governments have to work through federal processes to do some of the basic functions of a local government. If you talk to county commissions and city councils in states that are east of the Mississippi, they don't spend a lot of time working through federal permitting processes just to maintain a power line or to maintain a road. We spend a lot of political time and capital on those issues because almost everything we do has a public land nexus. And so we're just spending a lot of our time working with federal agencies in ways that people in other states don't have to worry about. I mean, that's what I used to do for the county. They were paying an attorney just to help them work through those processes, and it makes life more expensive, it makes processes slower, and all of that is a cost to the taxpayer on both sides.
Let's pivot to education. It's one of those issues that we see at the top of polling people's concerns.
Yeah.
Seems appropriate to start here with you also because we're at a university. And I asked Senator Reby about K through 12. We spend near the top per pupil, but the results that we get are pretty low, especially in things like math and science. The first public schools date back to the 1630s, I learned. Do you support increased federal funding for schools? It's about at 8% right now. And what about vouchers? A lot of people in your party support a voucher system. Can you speak to those two things?
Yeah, when it comes to education, I think the people who should be making the decisions should be state and local school boards and parents. Federal funding usually comes with federal mandates and federal strings. So I'd like to see more state and local control, less federal dictation to schools on how they manage things. And I think parental involvement is absolutely key. My mom was a school teacher. She was a stay-at-home mom when I was young, and then she was teaching school. And one of the things I've learned from her is that parental involvement makes a huge difference, a much bigger difference than dollars spent. So I would like to see parents and school boards and educators be the ones who are deciding what happens in classrooms, and let them get creative. Let them do a good job of educating students. They care about students. They want to see good outcomes.
And does that include supporting vouchers?
Yeah, I think parents should have options for how their kids are educated, whether that's vouchers or some other version of that. I am in favor of parental involvement and parental choice.
Okay. We had a question from Serena Cervantes, the president of the Pre-Law Society, that I asked Senator Reby, and I'd like to ask it to you as well because I hear it from my students a lot. She said, there's been a shortage of affordable housing. If you are elected, how will you help Utah families get more affordable housing for young adults, low-income families, and the homeless? And does the federal government have a role here?
Yeah, the second part of that is a really great question. We do have an affordability problem, and especially when I talk to people under the age of 40, they're very concerned about that. College students, I was at SUU this morning, talked to college students, told them the same thing. When I talk to college students, they're all worried that they're not going to be able to get jobs, and even if they do, they won't be able to afford houses. Most of the policy decisions that impact housing affordability are state and local decisions. However, we clearly have federal policies that are impacting this. One of the examples that I use for this is 3 years ago, we were energy independent, and now we're not because of federal policies about how much of our own natural gas and oil and gas we're going to produce. Well, now our energy prices are higher, and when energy and fuel prices are higher, all of the inputs to houses cost more. It costs more to ship things, it costs more to build things, and housing prices keep going up. We've also passed some big spending bills that make inflation worse. When inflation's worse, houses cost more, but also the interest rates get higher. So there are a lot of federal policies that aren't necessarily housing policies that are contributing to the problem of housing affordability, and those are things that I can work on from the federal side, while the state and local governments work on some of the local policies that impact it.
And it sounds like in your answer, yeah, please.
Thanks.
And it sounds like in your answer, you're starting to get close to what was the #1 issue in the ABC Ipsos poll for issues that are most important to people, and that is inflation. I don't think that's a surprise to you. I've heard you speak about it. The IMF, though, is saying that the entire world is experiencing inflation. And I watch a lot of foreign news, and they're all blaming their leaders for inflation in their country. Yeah. What about the world pressure that's being exacted upon us in inflation pressure, and the role that central banks would have? I hear a lot of candidates for Congress talking about what the president or Congress should do, but what would you see Congress doing that would affect our country, even though we have these global pressures? Could you address that a little bit?
Sure, and I just did to some extent.
Yeah, you did.
You know, we've passed some huge federal spending bills outside of the appropriations process in the last few years, and if you pump a lot of federal dollars into the economy, it makes inflation worse. The more dollars you have, the less they're worth, and then each dollar doesn't go as far. You can't buy as much with it, and that's inflation, right? So we've got to get our spending under control. Inflation and spending are tied, and just spending less won't necessarily fix it, but we've got to stop making it worse. And when we have a strong economy and we're not spending money we don't have, then we can gain on our deficit. When we have a strong economy where we don't go as far into debt, we gain on the interest, and that will also help with the problem.
I see. You're doing really great segues into my next topic. Because my next topic is one that I asked Senator Reby about, and that's the spending and deficit that we have. $1.7 trillion, $33 trillion in debt. Maybe it's 34 by the end of this event. I don't know. You've said that we don't have a revenue problem.
Yep.
You've said that we have a spending problem.
Yes.
And my question is similar to what I asked Senator Reby. If we have a spending problem, where are you going to cut? Because when you take Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, including the ACA, veterans benefits, all of the things that are mandatory, and defense spending, no one seems to want to cut that. Interest on the debt, we're at 85%. So now we have 15% to cut, not enough to get rid of the deficit. So is it just a spending problem, or is it also a revenue problem?
No, it's a spending problem. And don't be too quick to write off that 15%. I mean, everything we cut is going to help. But we have to be willing to look at the non-discretionary spending. I mean, we call it non-discretionary spending because it doesn't go through the appropriations process, but we still have the discretion to decide how or whether we're going to participate in these programs and what they should look like. I don't have a 5-point plan that I'm going to present on what we do with those programs, but I'm willing to take a look at them. And we have to be willing to take a look at them. They can't be off the table because that's where so much of the spending is, and there's got to be a better way to do it.
Yeah, you're talking about appropriations bills, and I teach my students quite often that it's been a long time since we've gone through regular order, since the appropriations process has worked. Indeed, the Congress seems very dysfunctional. We're 11 days away from a government shutdown if we don't pass, a GAP bill. Do you support shutting the federal government down to get control of spending?
I think there's a lot better way to get control of spending. Okay. And if you've been paying attention, there's been a fair amount of upheaval in Congress lately. And if you haven't watched the news, we have a new Speaker of the House. But a lot of the debate around that had to do with regular order and the appropriations bills. And I've said a lot of times on the campaign trail that I don't love political grandstanding. I don't love political stunts. I don't like making a mess in Washington just for the sake of making a mess. But I will say this process has been, it's been messy, but it's kind of a beautiful process. This is how our system of government works. The House was always supposed to be a little messy. The House of Representatives is supposed to represent the people. And it's a pretty good cross-section of the country. And the debates that are happening, I mean, if you get through the personalities and get down to the issues, we're debating whether the people's business should be happening in front of the people. And that's a debate we need to have. And the new speaker promised in his first speech when he accepted the gavel a new level of transparency, and that the work of the House would be done in a way that the American public knows what Congress is doing. And our system held. We got through all the debate. We had 3 weeks of no speaker, and it was embarrassing, and there was a lot of, talking on the news and writing in papers about how awful it was. But in the end, we got a new speaker, and he's talking about regular order. He's talking about passing appropriations bills, and we didn't have violence. We didn't have, a tear in the fabric of our country. We went through robust debate and a process, and we're moving forward now, and I think that's a really good thing. And so let's not lose sight of the fact that our system is working while we're watching it look messy.
Do you support Mike Johnson, the new Speaker of the House from Louisiana?
Yeah.
You do?
I watched his speech. If any of you have not watched that speech, go pull it up on YouTube and watch it. I thought he struck a really good tone and just the right note. I mean, the first thing he did is acknowledge to the minority leader, we're all Americans. At the end of the day, we all want what's good for America, so we're going to find common ground. We're going to work together. I thought that was great. Second thing he did was acknowledge the previous speaker and the work he did and thank him for that. I thought that was great. And then he talked about things like, more transparency and returning to regular order and moving forward in a way that's productive. And I thought it was just exactly what we needed after 3 weeks of chaos.
I asked this question of Senator Reby, and I promised that I would ask it of you verbatim the way I asked it of her, because I've dealt with this issue before, and it evokes passion, let's put it that way. So, in polling, this district has shown strong support for the Second Amendment. The two reasons I hear the most are self-defense and a bulwark against tyranny, a potential tyrannical government. But the U.S. has a problem with mass shootings, gun homicides, suicides with guns, and guns are the leading cause of death of children now in this country. So I also read that a couple of years ago, guns were used in 176,000 instances of self-defense. So taking all of that together, do you see the problem that we are facing as a country as something that can be addressed by Congress? And if so, how?
Wow. There was
Too much?
a lot in that
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
And
I wanted to be fair.
yeah. At the end, you said the problem we're facing as a country, and I'm not sure you defined the problem, so I'm going to. The Second Amendment couldn't be more clear. We have the right to keep and bear arms. And there's a lot of debate about why we have that right, but the language is clear that we have the right. And so whatever is happening with people using firearms inappropriately, we've got to address that without violating the Second Amendment.
How do we do
usually, hang on, I'm getting there. Usually the debate devolves into a, should we own guns, should we not be able to own guns, who should own guns, who should decide who can own guns, and I just think that is probably the wrong debate. I don't know what the answer is yet, but I think we've got to figure out what the root cause is of whatever other problems are contributing to people wanting to take lives and people wanting to take their own lives. But the Second Amendment remains in place. It's part of the Constitution, and it's an important part of the Constitution.
Okay, thank you. Since you're talking about, the Second Amendment, it got me thinking about the other amendments, and I don't really have notes on this, but the Cato Institute, which is a very pro-American institute, ranks the U.S. as 17th on the Human Freedom Index. 17th. When the word freedom is generally associated with America, and it's everything from freedom of the press at 42nd up to freedom of speech and that sort of thing. And you've spoken a lot about protecting our freedoms. What can we do generally in Congress to get people to start focusing on these things? For example, I teach about the Fourth Amendment, and not very many people seem to care about mass surveillance and that sort of thing. Is this a concern to you, this Human Freedom Index? And we seem to be dropping as well.
Yeah, I don't know enough about how Cato does their Freedom Index to speak to that specifically, but I do have concerns about the Fourth Amendment, about privacy, and about the idea that we're just willing to accept a certain level of infringement of our freedoms. I don't know what all of the answers are, but I think one of the solutions is we should be talking about it. So when I was campaigning before the state convention, I was a really green candidate. I was still, really new at this. And I was standing outside of Delta High School as people were preparing to go to the state convention, and that there was kind of a big circle of maybe a couple dozen people around me firing questions at me, and I was answering them as fast as I could. And somebody said, "Can you think of any area where we need more government regulation?" And I thought about it for a second and said, "No, nothing comes to mind." And he said, "Well, what about artificial intelligence?" And I was like, "Okay, you got me. There may be an area there where we need more government regulation, because the purpose of government is to protect the freedoms of individuals. And we are in an era that I think the people who wrote those amendments in the Bill of Rights could never have imagined, and yet they wrote the amendments to be clear enough and broad enough to cover a time like this. And we do have to be secure in our person and in our papers, and we have a right to privacy, but what does that mean in an era where, we're carrying around cell phones that we're clicking yes to letting them do surveillance on us, and where governments are so sophisticated that they can surveil every one of their citizens all of the time and know what everybody's doing and give them a score. So that's probably an area where we could use more government regulation, because the job of government is to protect our freedoms, and our freedoms are being infringed on in ways that we never would have imagined even 10 or 15 years ago, let alone a couple hundred years ago. And I don't know what all the answers are, but I know we need to be having the conversation, and we need to be having it very openly. It's hard to even know what's true anymore. I've seen deep fakes that were really convincing. I've got friends who won't have the flashlight app on their smartphone, and I'm not sure that not having the flashlight app actually gives them the protection they're hoping it does. But we've got tough choices to make. We've got decisions to make about the trade-offs between privacy and convenience, and government's going to have to be part of that conversation.
The second question that I got from students that was in greatest number was about Israel and Ukraine. And they talk a lot about it in my classes. You're a strong supporter of Israel, am I correct? Yeah. How best should we support them? Arms, money? And here's a question for you. Is Biden doing the right thing right now in supporting Israel?
Well, thank you for that question that was simple and not all loaded. It's a fairly compound question. We should be supporting Israel. And I've been really shocked. I've worked in politics for a while. I thought I was fairly hardened into it, but I've been shocked at how many people don't think Israel has a right to defend itself, and that conversation's such a complicated conversation for so many people. So just to be clear, Israel has a right to defend themselves. But what we should be doing to support them, I think, depends in large part on what Israel needs. So that conversation happening right now here on the stage, I don't have enough information to give you a solid answer, and I don't know that you do either. Israel needs to be taking the lead on this. We are the world's superpower, and we have a role to play in the world, but it's not being the world's nanny or the world's police. So we need to support our allies, but we don't need to tell them how to support themselves. So I think Israel should be taking the lead. We should be supporting Israel with what they need.
And is Biden doing that?
I don't know. Sorry, I'm not going to give you a
Is
yes
that
or
a
no
no
answer to
or
that
I
question.
don't know?
I don't know.
Oh, I see.
I'm not going to give you a yes or no answer to that question
Yeah.
because I have been
Yeah.
campaigning and
Yeah.
really focused
Sure.
on the 2nd District and have
Sure.
not followed this as closely
Yeah.
as probably a lot of people in the audience have.
Yeah. Yeah. And
So
I
I'm not
think-
going to say yes or no, but
Yeah.
I do think, well, that.
Yeah, yeah. And I think there's a lot of people that have concern about what's happening to the people in Gaza as well, and even Israel has expressed that, and President Biden has as well.
Yeah.
What about the Ukraine? There's a lot of people in your party that don't want to fund the Ukrainians against the Russians.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, do you fit into that crowd? What's your position for supporting Ukraine?
So our relationship as a nation to Ukraine is very different than our relationship to Israel. When Russia invaded Ukraine, the rest of the world stood up and said, this is unacceptable, and I think that was good. We sent money and we sent supplies, and Ukraine didn't do a great job of telling us what they were doing with the resources we were sending them, and that's not acceptable. And I've said throughout the campaign we need an accounting of what they've done with the dollars and the supplies we've sent them before we send them anything else. I know they've since made an effort to give us more of an accounting, but they still can't tell us where it all went. And so that is, again, a conversation that needs to be had. I don't have access to any classified information. I know what's on the news. But it looks like Ukraine's doing a decent job holding their own, and I don't know that we need to send them any more money or any more supplies until we know what they've done with what we've already sent them. And maybe when we know that answer, the answer is still that we don't need to send them anything else. But we shouldn't be helping anyone who can't even keep track of what we've already given them.
Okay. I spoke with Senator Reby about climate change, and what I told her was we had a Republican representative come here. His name is Bob Inglis, and he came here to state that climate change was a problem and that there needed to be a conservative solution. His conservative solution, he said, was to have a carbon tax because that would incentivize the private sector to address the issue. Would you support something like that?
So as a staffer, I listen to a lot of carbon tax pitches, and none of them have convinced me yet. I really like what John Curtis is doing with the Conservative Climate Caucus, and I know a lot of people were really suspicious of that to start with, because anytime you use the word climate, it's a buzzword, and people sort of already separate into their corners. But what I love, I went to their big launch meeting in Salt Lake City, and he had chairman of powerful committees. He had, I think, 30-something members of Congress there. And what they were talking about is that as conservatives, we have good answers to these questions. We don't have to sit and debate, what science is real, what science isn't. We know we want clean air, we know we want clean water, and we know if we unleash American ingenuity, we're gonna come up with solutions. And if we're creating a better mousetrap, so to speak, we can export that. We can sell those to China, to India, to other parts of the world. But if what we're doing is tying our own hands and saying we're not going to continue to develop, that doesn't help anyone else in the world. It doesn't help us. So the conservative solution would be American ingenuity. Let's find ways to do it better, cleaner, more efficiently.
Okay, thank you. Another issue that I've noticed that conservatives and liberals both share concern about but have different solutions for is the issue of inequality. And I asked Senator Reby about it as well. Both are worried about it because the greater the inequality in a democracy, the more likely you might have instability, and we've seen that throughout history. I was wondering, is inequality in wealth and income a major concern for you? And if so, what should be done?
I mean, is it a concern for me?
Yeah.
Sure. It's never a good thing when people can't climb the socioeconomic ladder. The American dream is being able to start with very little and end up comfortable, right? That's what we want to see. That's what we all believe in. What the solution is, again, I think it's that we unleash American ingenuity. We have public schools. Everybody gets an education. Everybody gets a shot in this country. We don't guarantee outcomes, but having the government pick winners and losers has also never turned out well. I think what we need to do is make sure that we remove any impediments to the American dream. So if there are government programs, if there are things the government's doing to get in the way of the American dream, then we need to remove it. And a lot of times we get caught up in talking about categories. We want to put people into categories. These categories of people are disadvantaged. These categories of people are advantaged. But the truth is, each individual is going to make thousands of decisions over the course of their lives that result in, where they end up at the end of their lives. And what we need to do is make sure we're clearing any impediments to people being able to choose the American dream.
I'm cognizant of the time, but a follow-up on that question, though. During COVID, we saw childhood poverty drop more than it ever had, and it was checks being issued by the government that a lot of people think resulted in that. It wasn't the programs from the 60s that have been going on for decades and trillions of dollars, but those direct checks to people lowered childhood poverty at a rate that we'd never seen before. What'd you say to that?
I would say we have an inflation problem right now.
Okay.
So I would dispute the basis of the question. Maybe in the short term, if a family had a little more cash on hand, it looked like we were doing something about childhood poverty. But now if their paycheck isn't stretching through the whole month, we haven't actually addressed the problem.
Interesting. Thank you. One thing I noticed on your website under issues was religious freedom. And you've said that protecting religious freedom is an important issue in your campaign. Do you see those freedoms under attack? And if so, how would Congress address that?
Yeah, I think religious freedom is, it's like any freedom. We're one generation away from losing it. And Congress's role in general is to protect the freedoms of the people. And especially in the House of Representatives, we represent the people. So we've always got to be on our guard and make sure we're guarding religious freedom. And it's not as intuitive, I think, now as it was maybe a couple of generations ago. I think if you'd have talked to somebody when my grandparents were my age about religious freedom, they'd have probably immediately gone to, protecting minority religions, as opposed to the idea of just allowing people to exercise their religion in society in general. We've had a shift, I think, in how Americans feel about religion. I've read articles about it. I don't know what all the causes are, but one of the things that we have to protect if we're going to keep the American dream alive and well, and if we're going to have robust a robust society where people can be their entire selves is you've got to be able to practice your religion. And so we talk a lot about people being able to get jobs and being able to get an education. Those things are all important, but you also have to be able to live and practice your beliefs if you're going to feel like you're really, truly a part of this society and can be yourself and contribute. I think a lot of the anger we see right now in politics is because people feel like they have to hold back, they can't say what they really believe. And there's an assumption a lot of times that means, they have to hold back on the things they want to say that are politically incorrect. But I think there's also been sort of a movement towards making religious topics taboo, and so a lot of pressure builds up, and we need robust religious freedom that needs to be part of our public life. We need to be able to talk about these topics and have it be part of the fabric of America.
I see. Okay. We're starting to run out of time, so I've got a couple more questions for you, and then we'll finish up. Immigration's another thing that you've put as a key issue in your campaign. The U.S. naturalizes about 1 million legal immigrants every year, and that's the most in the world, according to U.S. News. Should we increase that number? Should we drop that number? Is it about right? When we talk about undocumented immigrants, the numbers vary from 10 to 14 million. I hope this isn't too compound of a question for you, but what should be done? I mean, do you support a pathway to citizenship? Do you support a comprehensive immigration bill? When you say that immigration is an issue, what is the solution?
Utah's in a unique position when it comes to immigration. We're obviously a very red state. And in red states, we usually talk about getting control of our borders, and that's important. We have to get control of our borders. We not only do we not know who's coming across our border, but we don't know what's coming across our border. And for a sovereign nation, that's absolutely essential. We've got to get control of our border. But amongst red states, you can't always talk about the naturalization problem either. And in Utah, I think we're unique that way, and I think that puts us in a position where we can lead on this issue. We have to have control of our border, and we also have to have a immigration system that makes sense. We have unfilled visas. We have Utah businesses that need visa workers and can't get them. And it's not just blue-collar workers. So yes, we have ag visas that are going unfilled. We also have tech visas that are going unfilled. All the way across the job market, we need more workers than we've got. And I think that puts us in a position where we can talk about comprehensive reform. We have to have control of the border. We have to have people coming here for jobs. And we're going to have to fix both of those problems at the same time. And there aren't very many places in the country where people can sort of intuitively get that. Utah's one of them.
And that reminds me of bipartisanship, which is another thing I asked Senator Reby about. You guys have both run a very civil campaign. I've been quite impressed by it. I mean, the only way you could solve that problem and have a comprehensive bill is through bipartisanship. How would you go about being bipartisan in Congress?
Well, I think I've already answered the question, but indirectly. So usually on the other side of the aisle, you're talking about immigration reform, about how to fix the process for getting here legally. Usually on my side of the aisle, you're talking about the border. I think you've got to talk about both, because we actually do need to fix both, and I think that makes it easier to get a bipartisan solution. You're talking about the things that both sides care about.
But both sides beat each other up over it too, right?
Yeah, that's politics.
Yeah. I mean, perhaps it's more beneficial to keep the issue alive than it is to solve it. I don't know. Last question. Is there an issue in this campaign that you think hasn't been addressed sufficiently enough? Is there one that you would like to talk about that you think that, I mean, I know you've been to, 17 debates or something like that? Yeah. Oh, did we lose you? Try again. I don't think
there's any issues that I have not had a chance to talk about. I've talked about every issue I wanted to talk about, and every issue I never knew I wanted to talk about, and every issue I didn't want to talk about. So instead of answering your question directly, I'm just going to say it's been educational, it's been thrilling, it's been amazing to run for Congress. I'm not done yet. The election is 2 weeks from today, but sitting on a stage like this and answering questions is harder than it looks. I know it doesn't look easy, but it's even harder than it looks. But it is so important. It's so integral to what we do as Americans, to self-governance, to accountability, to representation, that, yes, I've talked about every issue. I don't think there's anything I haven't had a chance to cover, but I love that I've had a chance to sit here in front of audiences and answer questions and let people get to know me. I want to represent them. It's fair that they get to know who I am. And this is the 17th debate I've done. This one's not completely a debate, but I'm still counting it. And I've been in all the counties. I've been all over the place, and it's just been so exciting to have people ask good questions. And my answers have gotten better. I'm scared to go back and look at my first debate, but I know it's going through the process helps me develop my answers. It helps me figure out what it is I really want, and it gives me a chance to learn what people want from me, and that's been amazing, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity.
Give a hand for Celeste Malloy. Thank you so much. Appreciate being here. And thank you to all of you. Boy, you when you show up to these events, you give me a lot of hope for our democracy. I really appreciate it. I think, if you want to applaud yourself, please do, because I think it's wonderful that you're here and you stayed here. Thank you. Have a good night. The election is November 21st, okay?